And what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Case 1. This is the heartbreaking story of Laura Ackerson. Laura Ackerson entered the world on April 30th, 1984, born to Roger and Brenda Ackerson. From the start, Laura radiated joy, a bright, bubbly child with a warm and lively spirit. She spent her early years attending Grace Fellowship Church with her family, where she quickly became known for her sweet nature and gentle heart. While details about her early childhood remain scarce, everything changed for Laura in 1996. That year marked the collapse of what once seemed like a picture-perfect family. Her parents' constant fighting eventually led to divorce when Laura was just 12. The split hit her hard and left emotional scars that would linger. After the separation, Brenda took Laura and moved to Iowa. Laura later pursued graphic design at Kirkwood Community College, drawn by a natural flair for creativity. She had an instinct for art. Color, composition, and visual storytelling were second nature to her. Eventually, Laura relocated to Kingston, North Carolina, hoping for a fresh beginning. There, she attended a real estate school and found work in marketing and design. She also built a circle of close friends in nearby Raleigh. Having moved around so much growing up, Laura had never had a stable friend group. Finally, she felt like she belonged. In March 2007, while dining at a local restaurant, Laura met a man named Grant Hayes. Interestingly, they shared a birthday, April 30th, which sparked an immediate connection. Born in 1979 in Raleigh, Grant had a musical streak and a strong religious upbringing. He gained local recognition as a performer, playing small venues and bars, and had a magnetic personality that drew people in. Years before meeting Laura, Grant had married a woman named Emily Lovers, whom he'd fallen for soon after high school graduation. That relationship burned fast and bright, and then fizzled out. Their divorce left a deep mark on Grant, who had written love songs inspired by her. With the end of that marriage came a decline in his mental health. He was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, and prescribed powerful medications like lithium. But instead of sticking with treatment, Grant began self-medicating with alcohol and harder substances. As time passed, Grant's behavior grew more erratic. He dabbled in synthetic hallucinogens, which only amplified his worst traits: narcissism, paranoia, and aggression. He started having bizarre delusions, believing aliens controlled the government, and that he was a chosen one destined to survive the apocalypse by finding a spaceship. He even rejected modern medicine, including vaccines, convinced they were harmful. Despite his deteriorating mental state, Grant's music career was still afloat. He was booking regular gigs, and that's around the time Laura came into his life. To outsiders, Grant might have looked like a rising star. But behind closed doors, his relationship with Laura quickly became toxic. He was controlling, physically and emotionally abusive, and chronically unfaithful. Laura, already emotionally fragile from her childhood, struggled to break free. He isolated her from her friends and dictated nearly every part of her life, from her social circle to her daily routine. Shockingly, the couple tied the knot just months after meeting. Laura, longing for stability and love after years of emotional turmoil, believed she had found her fairy tale ending. But her friends were blindsided by the news. None of them even knew she was in a relationship, let alone married. Still, they stood by her, hoping she had made the right choice. Not long after Laura became pregnant, she was overjoyed, imagining a fresh chapter as a mother. Grant, on the other hand, wasn't thrilled. The news only intensified his possessiveness. When their son, Grant Jr., was born 9 months later, Laura poured every bit of love she had into him. Naming the baby after himself seemed like a classic move from Grant. Not necessarily a sentimental one, but more a display of ego. Laura adored her son. Meanwhile, Grant was still chasing gigs, cheating, and indulging in drugs, showing little interest in fatherhood. Eventually, he was offered a job in the Virgin Islands. He took it without hesitation, leaving Laura and their newborn behind in North Carolina. Whether or not he was actually working out there is unclear, but one thing's for sure: he wasn't alone. Grant began seeing a woman named Amanda Perry Tucker, a single mother and aspiring actress. Amanda had scored small, uncredited roles in shows like The Sopranos and The Stepford Wives, but her career hadn't taken off. And that's where another chapter in this tangled story begins. Grant Hayes was instantly drawn to Amanda Perry Tucker, and not just because of her charm. Amanda had money, nearly $200,000 in cash and $80,000 worth of jewelry, possibly from her previous divorce, though that's never been confirmed. At the time Grant met her, he was flat broke, no savings, no stability. But Amanda had resources, and that changed everything for him. Their relationship picked up quickly. For Grant, being with Amanda was more than romance. It was leverage. He flaunted the affair, making no effort to hide it from Laura. In fact, he used it as a weapon, taunting and ridiculing her at every opportunity. But then Laura did something Grant never saw coming. She'd had enough. After years of enduring his manipulation, betrayal, and cruelty, Laura finally stood up and said she was leaving him for good. Surprisingly, even people close to Grant supported her decision. His own family, along with his ex-wife Emily, encouraged Laura to walk away, fully aware of how toxic Grant really was. But then came a twist. Laura discovered she was pregnant again. Despite everything Grant had put her through, she gave him yet another chance. Though by now, it was more like chance number 10. That decision spoke volumes about how deeply Laura loved her children. She was willing to endure emotional hardship just to try and keep her family intact, likely driven by the pain of her own parents' divorce. Trying to make things work, Laura packed up her life and moved to the Virgin Islands with her son Grant Jr., hoping proximity might help fix things. But Grant didn't see her arrival as a loving gesture. To him, it was an inconvenience. With Laura around, he couldn't keep living a double life under her nose. Eventually, Laura gave birth to her second son. Sadly, the baby faced serious health issues right from the start, and the family needed better access to medical care. So they relocated back to North Carolina. Grant was furious about the move. He blamed Laura and the kids for dragging him away from potential opportunities in the Virgin Islands. Meanwhile, Amanda remained in the picture, now living in New York, and urged Grant to explore opportunities in the entertainment industry there. But Grant didn't go to New York for work. He went to be with Amanda, and he loved it. He was finally close to her, away from his responsibilities, and immersed in a city full of distractions. Eventually, he reached out to Laura with a surprising request. He asked if he could take Grant Jr. for a diaper modeling photo shoot, promising he'd bring him right back. Laura hesitated but agreed. She wanted her kids to know their father, despite everything. What she didn't know was that Grant had a completely different plan. When he didn't return their son as promised, Laura turned to Facebook for clues, and what she found shattered her. Grant had secretly married Amanda in New York and was now living with her. Along with Grant Jr., Laura was devastated. But the nightmare wasn't over. When she called to confront him, Grant dropped another bombshell, one that would flip her world upside down. According to him, their marriage had never been legal in the first place. Desperate for answers, Laura checked the marriage certificate, and there it was. Grant's signature was missing. Their union had never been legally binding. Then came the most gut-wrenching part. Grant and Amanda had filed for emergency custody of Grant Jr. and won. Because there was no formal custody agreement, and because Laura had no job or stable housing at the time, the court sided with Grant. He showed up to the hearings alone and claimed Laura was unfit. The court ruled in his favor, without ever hearing her side of the story. She went back to court and presented strong evidence, showing Grant's abusive behavior and unstable mental health. Her determination forced the court to order psychological evaluations for both parents. In the meantime, Laura was allowed to speak with her sons daily and see them on weekends. But even then, Grant and Amanda, now pregnant with his child, found ways to make those moments unbearable. They interrupted phone calls, limited her access to the boys, and did everything possible to keep Laura at a distance. Still, Laura held on. And then came the psych evaluation. Grant failed it, badly. The report noted that he had no real connection with his kids. The children were more comfortable, more at ease, and visibly happier with Laura. She, on the other hand, was described as a devoted and nurturing mother. Someone who put her children first, no matter the cost. The court took this seriously and ordered a more in-depth evaluation of Grant. Around the same time, Amanda gave birth to a baby girl, Lillian, on June 9, 2011. Following an intense custody battle, the court ruled in favor of a rotating 3-2 schedule between Laura and Grant, alternating 3 days with one parent, then 2 with the other. But by this point, Grant was barely holding himself together. His temper was worsening, and it was clear something was boiling beneath the surface. Then came the moment everything fell apart. On July 13, 2011, Laura had plans to meet her close friend and business partner, Chavin, later that evening. But she never showed up, and she never called. At first, Chavin didn't panic. Laura had mentioned earlier she needed to stop by Grant's place to pick up her boys. Her last known communication was a text she sent to Grant, letting him know she was on her way. He never replied. Days passed with no word, no calls, no texts, nothing. By July 18th, after 5 days of total silence, 27-year-old Laura Ackerson was officially reported missing by loved ones. Police acted fast. They searched her apartment, which looked completely normal. No sign of a struggle, nothing out of place. Surveillance footage showed her leaving the building, but never coming back. Their next stop was Grant and Amanda's apartment. Officers arrived with a search warrant and immediately sensed something was off. The couple wasn't home, but what was inside the apartment raised every red flag imaginable. The scent of bleach hit them like a wall. The space had been scrubbed top to bottom, suspiciously spotless. A few things were conspicuously missing. A shower curtain, a vacuum cleaner, several rugs. Patches on the floor were discolored, clearly scrubbed with harsh chemicals. But what really rattled investigators were 2 pieces of paper they discovered. The first was a handwritten song draft titled Man Killer. The lyrics painted a chilling picture of a woman being murdered, strangled to death. The second paper was a supposed agreement written and signed by Laura, stating she'd give up custody of her children to Grant for $25,000. Anyone who knew Laura would have immediately called foul. Her children were her everything. There was no price tag she'd ever put on being with them. This agreement screamed forgery. At that point, police knew time was critical. They needed to find Grant and Amanda fast. Security camera footage gave them a clearer timeline. After July 13th, Amanda was spotted with the kids at a local Chick-fil-A. Grant, meanwhile, was seen shopping in the early hours of July 14th at both Walmart and Target in Raleigh. But what he purchased was downright disturbing. Goggles, bleach, trash bags, tape, a reciprocating saw and blades, and a lint roller. That wasn't all. Later that day, Amanda called her daughter with a strange request to take care of the kids for most of the day. Then, on July 16th, Grant was caught making another unnerving purchase, large quantities of ice and coolers. Shortly afterward, he rented a U-Haul trailer. He, Amanda, and the 2 boys headed to Richmond, Texas, supposedly to visit Amanda's sister, Karen Berry. They arrived around July 19th, but Grant made yet another suspicious stop, this time at a local Home Depot. His shopping list? Heavy-duty gloves and 8 bottles of acid. Texas police, now collaborating with North Carolina authorities, paid a visit to Karen Berry. What she told them was alarming. On the night of July 19th, Grant and Amanda had asked to borrow a boat. They wanted to go out to Oyster Creek, a remote gator-filled canal with thick vegetation and murky water. Grant and Amanda asked whether the alligators in Oyster Creek ate humans, whether wild hogs could consume flesh, and whether bloodthirsty sharks were native to Texas waters. Karen assumed these were just strange city questions, but to investigators, it was clear they were scouting a body dump site. A team of officers was sent to Oyster Creek immediately. Another team combed the area for surveillance footage. Tragically, both efforts bore fruit. In Oyster Creek, after hours of carefully navigating dangerous waters, filled with reeds and lily pads, police discovered remains. They had found Laura. What was left of her had been so badly mutilated that even determining the exact cause of death was difficult. But forensic examiners concluded she had likely died from manual strangulation or a powerful blow to the neck. The evidence was overwhelming. The bleach-soaked apartment, the forged custody letter, the disturbing purchases, the chilling lyrics, and the remains in Oyster Creek. Laura's life had ended not in an accident, not in a moment of rage, but as the result of a calculated, cold-blooded plan. Grant Hayes and Amanda Perry Tucker were no longer just suspects. They were murderers. When investigators located Laura's car, a white 2006 Ford Focus, it was clear someone had gone to great lengths to clean it. The interior had been washed thoroughly, and there was visible damage to the rear of the vehicle. Then came even more damning footage. Surveillance showed Amanda near Karen Berry's home, discarding bottles of acid. Just 13 days after Laura was last seen, the case took a major turn. On July 25, 2011, Grant Hayes and Amanda Perry Tucker were arrested at Grant's parents' house in North Carolina. Both were charged in connection with Laura's death. Their trials were held separately, and as expected, each tried to shift the blame. Grant claimed that Laura had shown up at the apartment on July 13th and threatened Amanda, saying she'd take her daughter the same way her own sons had been taken. According to Grant, Amanda lashed out during the confrontation and killed Laura, while he only helped cover it up. Amanda, on the other hand, painted herself as a victim. She said Grant had been emotionally abusive and manipulative for years. Her version of events claimed that Laura and Grant got into a heated argument, and Laura accidentally hit her head during the fight, something Amanda conveniently didn't witness because she was in another room with the children. Amanda said that when Grant told her Laura was hurt, he instructed her to leave with the kids so he could call for help. She went to Chick-fil-A, and when she returned, Laura was gone. Grant then casually claimed that Laura was fine and had already left. It wasn't until they were in Texas, she said, that Grant confessed what had really happened, and then threatened her into helping him hide the truth. Despite their stories, the mountain of evidence said otherwise. Both Grant and Amanda pleaded not guilty, but the court didn't buy it. On September 16, 2013, Grant Hayes was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. His demeanor in court was chilling. He smiled, laughed, and showed no hint of remorse. It was as if he thought he was going on vacation, rather than facing justice for a brutal crime. Amanda's sentencing came months later, on February 19, 2014. She received a sentence of 13 to 16 years. During sentencing, the judge shared his perspective plainly. He believed Amanda could have stopped what happened to Laura. Instead, she chose to be a participant. She may have expressed remorse in court, but many questioned whether it was genuine or just another performance. But that wasn't the end for Amanda. Texas authorities charged her separately for tampering with evidence, and she was hit with an additional 20-year sentence. As for how this horrifying crime actually unfolded, investigators believe Grant lured Laura to his apartment under false pretenses. She was told she'd be able to see her boys, maybe even take them home. Grant may have even lied and said he was ready to give her full custody. That's the only explanation for why Laura would travel all the way from Kingston to Raleigh alone, especially when her friends had warned her never to meet Grant without backup. Tragically, Laura walked straight into a trap. One theory suggests that once she arrived, Grant and Amanda forced her to write and sign the so-called custody letter, threatening her with the loss of her children if she didn't comply. Then, she was attacked, either strangled or struck with a fatal blow. It was cold, calculated, and devastatingly cruel. Why? Likely because Grant wanted Laura gone for good, out of the picture, so he could continue his life with Amanda, free of custody battles and court hearings. But the ultimate irony? Amanda and Grant divorced just a year later, in October 2014. Everything he did, all the lies, the violence, the destruction, ended in nothing. Today, Laura's two sons, along with Amanda's daughter Lillian, in the care of Grant's parents. Thankfully, they are loving and nurturing, the exact opposite of their father. But it's heartbreaking to think of the childhood these boys lost, growing up without their mother because of their father's selfishness. Laura Ackerson was a vibrant, loving, creative woman, a devoted mother, a loyal friend, and a daughter who deserved so much more. Her death was the result of manipulation, control, and cruelty at its worst. And it's a powerful reminder of the importance of knowing your worth, setting boundaries, and walking away from those who mean you harm, no matter how much love you think you have to give. Laura didn't get the chance to start fresh, but maybe her story will help someone else realize. It's never too late to choose yourself. Case 2. It was a cool October afternoon in Conway, New Hampshire. Abby Hernandez had just finished her school day. She was only 3 days away from turning 15 and was wearing her favorite new boots, an early birthday gift from her mom. As she walked home, texting her boyfriend, everything seemed normal. It was a walk she'd done many times before. But then a car pulled up beside her, and everything changed. Abby was gone, and no one knew where she was or what had happened to her. Abby Hernandez, who most people simply called Abby, came into the world on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire. Her parents, Xenia and Ruben Hernandez, were thrilled to welcome her. Growing up, Abby was known for her bright personality. She was cheerful, full of energy, and got along with just about everyone. She liked to call herself a tomboy, and she totally embraced that label. Abby had a deep love for sports and a big soft spot for classic rock. Her outfits, her attitude, it all reflected that cool, laid-back style. At the time of the incident, Abby was dating a boy named Jimmy Campbell. The two were inseparable, and everyone around them could see how much Jimmy adored her. Their relationship was the kind people envied, genuine, and full of affection. Life hadn't always been easy, though. When Abby was still young, her parents divorced. After that, Xenia raised Abby and her sister Sarah on her own. Even with this big shift in their family dynamic, Abby kept her positive outlook. She didn't dwell on things she couldn't change, and was known for staying optimistic, no matter what came her way. But everything would take a tragic turn on what started as just another ordinary day in October 2013. October 9th, 2013, began like any other school day for Abby. She was just a few days away from celebrating her 15th birthday, something she'd been looking forward to for weeks. That morning, she chose to wear a gray sweatshirt, black yoga pants, and a brand new pair of black-heeled boots. Her birthday present from her mom, which she was wearing for the first time. Anyone who's ever worn new shoes knows that first day pain, and Abby was feeling it hard. Her best friend, Miranda, noticed how she limped around school, clearly uncomfortable. Still, she made it through the day, smiling, chatting with friends, and even snapping some pictures. But that afternoon, something went terribly wrong. Zinnia expected her daughter to walk through the door after school like usual, but Abby never came home. Normally, she took the bus, but she sometimes enjoyed walking back if the weather was nice and the mood struck her. Since the walk was short, Zinnia figured maybe this was one of those days. Of course, she had no idea how painful those new boots had made Abby's walk that day. As time passed and the sky darkened, Zinnia's concern grew. She called Abby's phone, but there was no answer. Panic quickly set in. Zinnia drove to the school and spoke to the librarian, desperately asking if anyone had seen her daughter. The answer left her frozen. Abby had left school on foot hours earlier. At 7 p.m. that night, Zinnia reported her 14-year-old daughter missing. The police jumped into action right away. Conway was a small community, and news of Abby's disappearance spread quickly. Investigators reviewed security footage from the school and spotted Abby, leaving the building at exactly 2:29 p.m., walking toward home just like she usually would. She had her backpack on and was still wearing the same clothes. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. There was no sign that she had run away. Her room was untouched, and none of her belongings were missing. Still, the investigators needed to ask all the standard questions. Had Abby been acting strange? Was she upset about something? Could she have been planning to leave? Everyone who knew her, friends, teachers, family, dismissed those ideas right away. Abby was excited about her upcoming birthday and had been busy planning the party down to the smallest detail. Her friends insisted she'd never just vanish like that. With no time to waste, police began canvassing the town, sharing Abby's photo with the public and organizing search efforts. Volunteers joined in, hoping to bring her home safe. The search for Abby had begun. Volunteers from all around came together in hopes of finding Abby. They searched tirelessly on foot and from the air. Even the FBI joined the case early on, bringing more eyes, expertise, and urgency. Despite all the effort, though, no trace of Abby was found. Within just a few days, the police were flooded with hundreds of tips. Investigators went through them one by one, chasing every possible lead. They also held frequent press conferences, keeping the public updated and trying to maintain hope. But as days passed without any progress, unease grew in the community. A dedicated website called Bring Abby Home was created, filled with photos and videos of Abby, keeping her story alive and urging people to help bring her back. Then came October 12th, Abby's 15th birthday. Instead of blowing out candles or unwrapping presents, her family held a candlelight vigil. Neighbors and friends gathered together, sang happy birthday, and prayed for Abby's safe return. It was a heartbreaking moment. Zinnia, her mother, was trying to stay strong, not just for Abby, but also for her other daughter, Sarah. But the weight of the unknown was crushing. Some days, hope felt impossible. Meanwhile, detectives kept at it. They pulled Abby's phone records and saw that her last location pinged about a mile from home. After that, the phone went completely dark. Text messages didn't reveal anything suspicious either. The last person Abby had messaged was her boyfriend, Jimmy, who had been taking the bus home around the same time. He was questioned, of course, but it quickly became clear Jimmy had nothing to do with her disappearance. Their relationship had been genuine and loving. Weeks passed. On November 6, 2013, almost a month after Abby vanished, Zinnia was sorting through her mail when one envelope caught her attention. It was postmarked October 23rd, exactly 2 weeks after Abby went missing. Something about it felt significant. When Zinnia opened the letter and began to read, her heart stopped. It was from Abby. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, though the tone and wording felt off. The letter said she was safe, that she loved her family, and that she had run away. She urged her mom not to lose hope. Zinnia read the letter over and over, but something didn't sit right. It was Abby's writing, yes, but not her voice. Zinnia handed the letter over to authorities immediately. While it shocked everyone, investigators weren't convinced by its contents. To them, the message felt forced, too polished, like someone had told Abby exactly what to write. DNA testing confirmed that the letter was indeed written by Abby, but detectives believed she hadn't written it freely. They didn't buy the runaway story for a second, and thankfully, they didn't stop investigating. Months went by with no sign of Abby. Then, on March 17, 2014, something unexpected happened. Roughly 30 miles from Conway, a woman was involved in a car accident. But instead of a typical exchange, the other driver pulled out a weapon and brutally attacked her. It was a terrifying encounter. The attacker was quickly arrested. At first, the incident seemed random, but investigators had a gut feeling this man might somehow be connected to Abby's case. They weren't ready to share why publicly, but something about him raised red flags. That man was 34-year-old Nathaniel Nate Kibbe. He was an odd and intense person, deeply into guns, the Constitution, and extremist political ideas. Investigators confiscated dozens of firearms from his home. He didn't put up a fight, but during the search of his remote property, police spotted a large shipping container tucked behind his house. It stood out immediately. When asked about it, Nate became defensive, insisting that the warrant only allowed them to seize his weapons, not to look elsewhere. Legally, the officers had to comply. So after collecting the firearms, they left, completely unaware that behind that container door was Abby Hernandez. Yes, Nate was Abby's kidnapper. But how did he manage to abduct her in the first place? Let's go back to the day Abby disappeared. She had just missed her school bus by seconds. Her feet were sore from those new boots, but with no other choice, she began the short walk home. As she was texting Jimmy, a car pulled up beside her. A man in his 30s noticed her limping and offered her a ride. Tired and grateful, Abby accepted. She had no idea that choice would lead to months of terror. Rather than taking her home, the driver turned into an empty parking lot. That's when the mood shifted. Abby tried to get out, but the man pulled a weapon on her, tied her hands, blindfolded her, and forced her to crouch down in the passenger side footwell, completely hidden from view. After a long and disorienting drive, the car finally stopped. Abby was dragged out and thrown onto something soft. When the blindfold came off, she realized she was on a filthy mattress, and she was trapped. She was inside Nate's shipping container. The room where Abby was being held was small, the floor made of cold metal. The door had latches on it, and the walls were padded to keep any sound from escaping. It was a prison disguised as a storage unit. When Abby looked up, she saw her captor again. This time, he was wearing a gold Halloween mask. Nate made it clear from the start, if she tried to scream or escape, there would be serious consequences. It's impossible to put into words what Abby must have felt in that moment. Fear doesn't even begin to describe it. Almost immediately, the nightmare began. Nate, who was both cruel and twisted, started a pattern of abuse and control. Even though she was already locked away in the shipping container, he kept her tied up for days at a time. He used devices like stun guns and shock collars to hurt her, for no reason other than his own sick satisfaction. And tragically, Abby was also repeatedly assaulted. Despite everything she was enduring, Abby refused to give up. Deep down, she clung to a powerful desire to survive and to one day return home. In the early weeks of her captivity, while Abby's family and police were appearing on the news, holding out hope, Nate would use those moments to taunt her. He'd tell her how close her family was, how hard they were looking for her, then twist the knife by reminding her that she was still stuck, still unseen. It was psychological torture, meant to break her spirit. But strangely, seeing her mom crying on TV didn't defeat Abby, it fueled her. It gave her a reason to keep going, a reason to fight. 2 weeks after she was taken, Nate forced Abby to write a letter to her mother, the same one Zinnia received in early November. Nate believed the letter would throw off the police. And though Abby did what he asked, she secretly scratched the words help and kidnap into the paper with her fingernails. But Nate noticed. He made her do it all over again and sent out the cleaner version. Still, the abuse continued. Months passed. At around the 6-month mark, Abby had a realization. She had some power in this horrible situation. She noticed that if she talked to Nate like a friend, acted calm and cooperative, he let his guard down. So she started to engage him in small conversations. Over time, Nate developed a strange emotional connection to her, one that Abby quietly used to her advantage. Nate began referring to her as the closest thing he had to a daughter. He'd sit and talk for hours about his life his conspiracy theories, his obsession with the Constitution. He even let her read books and eventually removed her blindfold, allowing her to see his face for the first time. It was then, through one of those books, a cookbook with the name Nate written inside, that Abby finally learned her abductor's real name. That was a turning point. Abby discovered more about Nate. He admired the Gadsden flag and had strong libertarian beliefs. He filled their conversations with political rants, as if he were teaching a class. She listened, quietly learning everything she could. She also learned about another part of Nate's life. He printed counterfeit money. He saw it as his way of getting back at a government he loathed. In an attempt to earn more trust, Abby even helped him with the fake bills. She figured the more useful and non-threatening she seemed, the better chance she had of surviving. Eventually, the constant abuse started to lessen, though it didn't stop completely. Around this time, Nate began hiring sex workers and paying them with counterfeit money. He wasn't just exploiting them, he was scamming them too. One of those women was 27-year-old Lauren Monday. The day after meeting Nate, she tried to use the money he'd given her and realized it was fake. Furious, she called him, threatening to go to the police. Nate hadn't given Lauren his real name, but he slipped up. His email address included his full name. On top of that, Lauren was able to give investigators a clear description of his car. This was a major break. Shortly after Lauren's call, Nate burst into the container in a panic. He was angry and unsettled, but Abby knew better than to react. She stayed calm, asked him what was wrong, and listened. She'd gotten used to his rants by now, and she knew it was safer to stay quiet and let him talk. Then, something unexpected happened. Nate walked over to Abby and handed her a plastic bag containing her clothes. "I need to get you out of here," he said. Abby didn't know what that meant. Was he moving her to another location, killing her, letting her go? She had no idea. Her heart was racing. He put her in the car and started driving. They drove for what felt like forever, and Abby tried to read the signs. Though she had learned to anticipate Nate's moods, this was different. He seemed more erratic than usual. Then she looked out the window. Recognition hit her like a wave. Nate was driving her back to the exact spot where he'd taken her, the same place where it all started. Without another word, he pulled over, told her to get out, and then he drove off. Abby slammed the car door shut and watched as Nate drove off, disappearing down the road. She stood there, frozen in disbelief. Part of her wanted to celebrate, scream, cry, anything to release the rush of emotions surging through her. But fear lingered. What if he changed his mind? What if he came back? Still wearing the same clothes from the day she vanished 9 months earlier, Abby began the walk home. Each step was filled with uncertainty. It felt surreal, like she was dreaming. But she kept going, until finally she reached her front door. Inside, Xenia was in the living room, overwhelmed by the same sorrow that had haunted her for months. Then Abby's voice, a soft call from the entryway. Xenia froze, thinking her mind was playing tricks on her. But when she turned around and saw her daughter standing there, alive, everything stopped. She was transported back to that awful October night when her world fell apart. And now, suddenly, the one thing she prayed for had come true. The emotions between them were indescribable. Xenia had lived every single day hoping, begging for this moment. And now, here Abby was, standing in front of her, safe, breathing. But the nightmare wasn't over. Though Abby had escaped, Nate was still out there. And opening up about what had happened was incredibly difficult for her. Just before letting her go, Nate had made one final threat. If she ever talked to the police, he would find her and her family. And it wouldn't end well. That threat was enough to silence Abby. Her instinct was to protect the people she loved, even if that meant keeping quiet about her abduction. Because of her silence, rumors spread quickly. People began questioning her story. Some accused her of lying, claiming she ran away and made the whole kidnapping up. The same community that had supported her family for months now turned their backs on them, casting doubt and judgment. It was heartbreaking, but with support from law enforcement and those who still believed in her, Abby eventually found the strength to speak the truth. She told them everything about the container, the mask, the torture, and revealed the identity of the man who had taken her, Nathaniel Kibbe. In 2014, Nate was arrested. Building the case took nearly 3 years. The charges against him were staggering, around 205 in total. They range from kidnapping to sexual assault to producing counterfeit currency. When the trial finally came, the verdict was clear: guilty. Nate was sentenced to 45 to 90 years in prison. Then came May 16, 2016. In a courtroom full of people, Abby walked in, stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. She faced Nate and delivered a powerful statement. She forgave him. She told him calmly and clearly that she forgave everything he had done to her, because she wasn't going to carry the weight of his cruelty for the rest of her life. That moment wasn't just about closure, it was about reclaiming her power. Abby explained that her experience changed her. She no longer took the little things for granted: sunsets, quiet mornings, laughter, freedom. The trauma she endured had reshaped her view of the world, but it hadn't broken her spirit. Today, Abby is living a quiet, peaceful life. She's a hairdresser and a devoted mother. Her days are filled with love, purpose, and healing. What Abby endured is unimaginable, but her story isn't just one of survival, it's a lesson in resilience. When faced with unspeakable horror, she didn't give up. She held on for herself, for her mother, for her future. Abby Hernandez is a fighter. Her courage in the darkest of moments reminds us all that even when the odds feel impossible, we can still hold on, we can still survive, and we can still rise. Case 3. On the afternoon of October 8, 2011, thick smoke rose from a quiet property just outside Córdoba, Spain. A fire had been lit in a hidden spot, burning hotter than usual. Not long after, a father called emergency services, saying his 2 young children had vanished while playing at a nearby park. Police, family, and neighbors quickly joined the search, hoping for a safe return. But behind this desperate call was a dark secret, one that would soon shock the entire country. José Breton, born in 1973 in Córdoba, Spain, grew up in a middle-class family. His early life was shaped by a traditional environment and a strict religious education. After finishing his studies, he enlisted in the military, where he rose to the rank of infantry corporal. He later served as an ambulance driver during the war in Bosnia, an experience that exposed him to intense trauma and ultimately led to his desertion. Once back in civilian life, José met Ruth Ortiz, a young veterinary student. Their relationship progressed quickly, and after 4 years together, they married in 2002. But from the very beginning, their marriage was deeply troubled. José had made it clear he didn't want children, and if they ever had any, Ruth would bear the full responsibility. Despite his warnings, Ruth gave birth to a daughter, also named Ruth, followed by a son, José. The arrival of their children marked a turning point. While he seemed somewhat tolerant of the girl, the birth of their son triggered a dark transformation. His behavior became oppressive, especially toward Ruth. Over time, he isolated her from her loved ones and dominated every detail of her daily life, driven by an obsessive need for control and a deep-seated fear of contamination. José's routines became increasingly strange. He refused to use public transportation or bathrooms unless he could sanitize every surface beforehand. At home, he demanded strict order and imposed rigid rules. The children were expected to wash their hands as soon as they got home and remain silent during meals. José often wore earplugs to block out household noise, a reflection of his extreme sensitivity and anxiety. For Ruth, life became unbearable. After years of enduring psychological and emotional abuse, she finally sought help. A psychologist helped her understand that José's behavior was not only abnormal but unacceptable. This clarity gave Ruth the strength to leave. In September 2011, she told José she was unhappy and wanted a divorce. José, instead of accepting the separation, began therapy in an apparent effort to change. He even consulted a psychologist for help managing his worsening anxiety. But his emotional state was fragile. At age 15, he had once attempted suicide after a breakup, an alarming precedent. As the divorce loomed closer, José grew increasingly unstable, constantly contacting his therapist and being prescribed medication that proved ineffective. Determined to move on, Ruth relocated to Huelva with their 2 children and sought refuge at her mother's home. José, meanwhile, returned to Córdoba. They agreed that he would have custody of the children every other weekend. It was during one of these visits that tragedy struck. On October 8, 2011, José called the police claiming his children, then aged 6 and 2, had vanished while playing in a park. He said they had run off, and he lost sight of them. The authorities responded immediately, launching an extensive search that included officers, emergency units, and even local taxi drivers. Posters with the children's faces were distributed throughout the city. Initially, investigators considered the possibility of an abduction. But as hours passed, inconsistencies began to surface. Notably, José didn't file an official report until 9 p.m., a delay that raised suspicions. When questioned at the station, he suggested someone from Ruth's family might have taken the children, pointing to the couple's ongoing separation as a source of tension. However, at the time of the children's disappearance, Ruth and her relatives were all in Huelva, far removed from the unfolding crisis. Upon hearing the news, Ruth immediately suspected Jose and traveled back to Córdoba. She organized a vigil with neighbors and family, praying for her children's safe return. As the investigation progressed, authorities began to focus on Jose's mental state. His history of controlling behavior and emotional instability made him a prime suspect. Detectives noticed that his statements didn't add up. He first claimed the children had disappeared while walking with him, but later said he had arrived by car and was momentarily distracted by a text message. He also claimed that earlier that day, his children had been with his sister before he took them to his rural property on the outskirts of Córdoba, arriving there around 1:15 p.m. While the children supposedly slept in the car, he said he lit a bonfire to destroy belongings that had once belonged to Ruth, an attempt, he said, to erase painful memories of their broken marriage. Later, around 5 p.m., he claimed he headed to the park to meet his brother and nephews, insisting the children had been sleeping in the vehicle since the early afternoon. These claims immediately raised red flags. Detectives sensed he was hiding something and decided to inspect the property that very night. Jose accompanied a team of investigators to his house. There, they discovered the bonfire he had mentioned, still smoldering with embers glowing faintly. It was a disturbing sight. The police also searched his car and found suspicious items, a pair of sharp kitchen utensils and a roll of duct tape. Jose claimed these were leftovers from moving out of the family home, but his distant, emotionless demeanor left investigators unconvinced. The following morning, as concern for the missing children intensified, detectives interrogated Jose again. This time, they requested security footage from cameras along the roads between his house and the park. While Jose's car appeared in the videos, the children did not. Witnesses at the park also confirmed they had seen Jose alone that afternoon. With suspicions mounting, investigators returned to Jose's house for a second, more thorough examination of the bonfire. The fire was now extinguished, and beneath the charred remains, they discovered a rectangular structure and an overturned iron table, both used to intensify the heat of the flames. In the ashes, they found small bone fragments. The possibility that these were human remains sent shockwaves through the team, but Jose downplayed the discovery, claiming he had only burned Ruth's personal belongings, books, clothing, and even preserved animals from her veterinary studies. Despite his explanation, investigators informed Ruth of the disturbing find and told her a forensic anthropologist would be brought in to examine the material. The experts studied the remains after they had been collected by police and concluded that the bones did not appear to be human. Instead, they belonged to various animals, mostly rodents and small carnivores. Still, authorities didn't rule Jose out. His behavior remained suspicious, and he showed none of the distress expected from a father whose children had vanished. Attention focused squarely on the bonfire. Forensic analysis revealed that it had been fueled with gasoline and roughly 600 pounds of firewood. Neighbors later reported seeing the fire burning as early as 3 p.m. and described the smoke as thick and foul-smelling, visible from several miles away. These details contradicted Jose's story and strengthened the theory that something horrific had occurred during the time he claimed the children were asleep. Investigators began to suspect that the children's bodies may have been destroyed in the fire. They dug beneath the bonfire, hoping to find conclusive evidence, but came up empty. Unfortunately, the excavation destroyed much of the original fire site, eliminating potential forensic clues. Pressure mounted. Jose was urged to confess, but he continued to deny any wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Ruth and her family, along with members of the local community, kept searching, clinging to hope. The children's faces appeared across Spanish news outlets, turning the case into a national headline. On October 12, 2011, Jose Breton was arrested and charged with the unlawful detention of his children and fabricating a crime. Although the initial searches of the property yielded no conclusive results, investigators were certain that something more lay hidden. Convinced that Jose's house held the key to the truth, they brought in a ground-penetrating radar expert and divided the land into sections, determined to skin every inch for buried evidence. The search for answers had become relentless. After 3 weeks without any breakthrough, a judge ordered Jose to remain in pretrial detention. Search teams expanded their efforts, deploying tracking dogs in hopes of uncovering buried remains. But again, nothing turned up. Authorities explored every lead, inspecting quarries, wells, lakes, and rivers using specialized divers and helicopters. Despite these exhaustive efforts, no solid evidence emerged. Desperate for answers, investigators reviewed José's mobile phone activity and examined additional locations where the children's bodies could have been hidden. Still, the search came up empty. By the end of 2011, the year closed without a single clue to suggest what had truly happened to the children. In early 2012, the authorities officially suspended the searches, convinced the children had never reached the park, contrary to José's claims. The case took another troubling turn when José attempted to take his own life in his prison cell. Though the injuries were minor, he was transferred to the prison infirmary. Public opinion remained divided. While many viewed José with suspicion, some members of his family continued to defend him publicly, insisting he would never harm his children. They clung to the belief that the children were alive and possibly hidden somewhere by someone close to them. This hope was fueled by scattered reports of alleged sightings, even from abroad. Theories involving potential accomplices began to surface, adding another layer of complexity to the case. 6 months after the children vanished, the court lifted the secrecy order on the investigation, allowing previously undisclosed testimonies to emerge. Witnesses described José as jealous and vengeful, details that cast new light on his character and added weight to the suspicions against him. Still, he maintained his innocence and repeated his version of events. The children had disappeared from the park. In August 2012, Ruth's family formally requested a second forensic analysis of the bone fragments found in the bonfire. These remains had originally been dismissed as non-human, but the new examination, led by another forensic anthropologist, yielded a shocking result. The bones were, in fact, human, and they belonged to 2 children between the ages of 2 and 6. This contradicted the earlier assessment and exposed a serious error that had delayed the truth for nearly a year. The revelation triggered an uproar. To eliminate any lingering doubts, a third analysis was commissioned, this time conducted by a team of forensic experts from a respected university in Madrid. Their findings confirmed the previous conclusion. The remains were unmistakably human and matched the profiles of 2 small children. Despite the defense's attempts to question the chain of custody and imply possible evidence tampering, authorities stood by the legitimacy of the forensic analyses. The bones had been processed by the police's own forensics lab, and their findings were clear. The children had died, and their bodies had been incinerated in the bonfire. Experts studying the remains noted the arrangement of the bones in the ashes, which suggested how the bodies had been placed. While it was impossible to determine whether the children were alive when the fire was set, the physical evidence strongly pointed to cremation. For Ruth, the discovery brought unimaginable grief, but also a painful sense of closure. She was finally able to lay her children to rest with dignity. In September 2012, with mounting evidence and new expert testimony, a judge formally charged José Breton with 2 counts of aggravated murder. The charges included the aggravating factor of kinship. As he awaited trial, José underwent psychiatric evaluations to determine whether he suffered from any serious mental illness. While he showed traits of narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders, he was deemed mentally competent and fully aware of his actions. Even as the case built against him, José never confessed. Authorities concluded that he had killed his children as a calculated act of revenge against Ruth. According to the reconstruction of events, October 8, 2011 was the day José carried out his plan. From September 29th to October 7th, he purchased sedatives after consulting a psychiatrist. Though he later denied acquiring the drugs, the investigation proved otherwise. These medications could have rendered the children unconscious, or even caused their deaths before they were placed in the fire. In the final days leading up to the tragedy, José Breton methodically set the pieces of his plan in place. In late September, he stockpiled firewood and purchased gasoline from a nearby station, preparing to carry out the act that would forever change the course of the investigation. He constructed a convincing alibi, informing his family that he would be spending the day at the park with his children. But in truth, his intentions were far more sinister. To strengthen the believability of his future story, José even ran a test. He briefly left his sister's children alone to observe how they reacted, an unsettling rehearsal for what was to come. On October 7th, he picked up his own children, spending the night with them at his parents' home. The next morning, he drove to his house with the children in the car. Before the journey, he had administered sedatives, medication previously obtained under the pretense of anxiety treatment to keep them unconscious. Upon arrival, he attempted to call Ruth, but when she didn't answer, he continued with his plan undeterred. Jose prepared a large bonfire in a secluded area of the property. He placed the children's bodies beneath a metal table, doused the wood with gasoline, and ignited the fire. The intensity of the flames, fed by large quantities of fuel and dry wood, quickly reduced the remains to charred bone fragments. He tended to the fire for hours, until around 5:30 p.m. Afterward, he drove a short distance and parked near the park. There, he called his brother and mother, pretending to be with the children and reinforcing his fabricated timeline. Once he felt his alibi was secure, he began manipulating those around him. He made multiple calls to his family, urging them to join the search for the missing children. Eventually, he contacted emergency services, reporting their disappearance, and later appeared at the police station to file a formal report, fully aware that the story he told was a lie. The trial of Jose Breton began on June 17, 2013. From the outset, his demeanor was unsettling. His rigid posture, unblinking gaze, and calm expression added an eerie tension to an already harrowing case. The trial opened with testimony from witnesses, including both Jose and Ruth. Jose maintained his innocence, denying all accusations. He claimed he adored his children and would have given his life for them. Trying to shift the blame, he argued that the real failure was on the part of investigators, accusing them of wasting time on him instead of searching for his children. "It's unbelievable," he declared, "that we still don't know where my kids are." Ruth, in contrast, painted a clear picture of their toxic relationship. She spoke about years of unhappiness and detailed episodes of emotional and physical abuse, both toward her and the children. Through tears, she recalled one moment when Jose slapped their son in front of others, prompting her to step in and tell him to never do it again. Forensic officers testified that the evidence had been preserved properly, and specialists confirmed what investigators had long feared. The remains found in the fire were human. One of the most devastating moments came when Ruth's cousin took the stand. He testified that Jose had privately confessed on 3 separate occasions to killing the children. According to him, Jose chillingly stated, "You'll never find them alive. They're dead." Despite Jose Breton's persistent claims of innocence, the prosecution maintained throughout the trial that there was overwhelming evidence proving he had taken the lives of his children in an act of unspeakable cruelty, driven by revenge against his ex-wife. On July 12, 2013, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury found the 40-year-old guilty of murdering both children. The verdict marked a pivotal moment in the case. Jose sat expressionless as the judgment was read. For the families of the victims, the decision brought a step toward justice, though the path to healing remained long and painful. On July 22, 2013, the court sentenced Jose to 20 years in prison for each murder, plus an additional penalty for filing a false police report. In March 2014, a cassation appeal was filed, claiming violations of Jose's right to the presumption of innocence. However, the Supreme Court upheld the 40-year sentence. A year later, in 2015, the Provincial Court of Córdoba reduced his sentence to 25 years. The case returned to headlines in October 2016, when Jose allegedly attempted suicide in prison. His lawyer, however, suggested he had likely been assaulted by another inmate. After several weeks in a hospital, he returned to prison, where he continued to receive visitors, including his mother, who remained convinced of his innocence. Attention then shifted to the question of prison benefits. According to Spanish law, Jose could request temporary release after serving a quarter of his sentence, approximately 7 years. But in 2019, those requests were denied. Authorities cited his lack of remorse, refusal to acknowledge his crimes, and his failure to apologize or attempt restitution. In 2021, reports emerged that during a restorative justice therapy session, Jose had finally admitted his guilt. The confession reportedly occurred in a group therapy setting where he revealed to fellow inmates, many of them also convicted murderers, that he was in prison for killing his children. The case resurfaced in the public eye once more in March 2025. A Spanish newspaper published excerpts from a forthcoming book that included a series of confessions made by Jose. Through 60 letters and several interviews conducted while in prison since 2016, he at last admitted the truth. The revelations rekindled national grief and horror over one of Spain's most harrowing crimes. His letters also included a deep, albeit belated, apology to Ruth. He acknowledged he would never have the courage to face her in person and ask for forgiveness. While Ruth has spent the years honoring the memory of her children and fighting against domestic violence, the publication of José's confession validated the investigators' original findings and confirmed the strength of the evidence that led to his conviction. Though his sentence remains in effect, the confession could influence future decisions about his incarceration. Yet, due to the brutality of the crime and the lingering absence of genuine remorse, many believe that José's chances of obtaining benefits or sentence reductions should remain firmly out of reach. For the public, and especially for Ruth and her family, the case has once again stirred painful memories. A crime that had once seemed resolved has returned to the spotlight, reviving the anguish of a loss that will never fully heal. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Case 4. Around 2 a.m., Sasha Samsudian got back to her apartment in downtown Orlando after a fun night out with friends. Security cameras showed her walking into the building, alone and ready to end the night. But later that day, police would show up at her door. What they found inside shocked everyone. The clues they uncovered led to a dark and unexpected truth, and the person responsible was someone no one ever imagined. At just 27 years old, Sasha Samsudian had carved out a promising life for herself. Based in Orlando, Florida, she worked as a social media manager for a local real estate agency, a job she was passionate about and excelled in. Described as energetic, sharp, and vibrant, Sasha was more than just a pretty face. Colleagues praised her professionalism, while friends admired her zest for life. She worked hard, celebrated often, and had a magnetic presence that lit up any room. Recently, she had moved into Uptown Place apartments at 911 North Orange Avenue, eager to embrace a new chapter in her life. The excitement was mutual. Sasha was thriving professionally and personally, and she was making every moment count. On the night of the Orlando soccer season finale, Sasha dressed in purple to cheer for her team. After a thrilling win, she joined friends at the Attic nightclub on East Pine Street to continue the celebration. Shortly after midnight, she decided to leave. It wasn't unusual. Her friends often split up for the night, planning to regroup later. Sasha had plans for breakfast the next morning with a friend, but when she didn't show up and didn't respond to calls or texts, he began to worry. Sasha was always connected, always responsive. Hours went by without a word. By afternoon, concern turned into alarm. Some of her friends went to check on her. In the parking lot of her apartment complex, Sasha's car was there. Inside the back seat was a baby shower gift she had planned to bring that day. They knocked on the door of Unit 345, but there was no answer. At 8 p.m., they called 911. When police entered the locked apartment, the living areas appeared untouched. But inside the bedroom, they made a horrifying discovery. Sasha's lifeless body was partially hidden under a duvet, with a hand visible at the edge of the bed. She had been brutally assaulted, raped, strangled, and beaten. Her body bore the signs of a struggle, with defensive wounds and abrasions. Her clothing had been torn, and the necklace she had worn was tangled in her hair. Her phone, purse, and key fob were missing. There was a strong smell of cleaning agents in the room, and suspicious bleach stains marked the bedsheets. Sasha's cleaning supply cabinet stood open, and a condom wrapper and shoe print were found nearby. Investigators noted something unusual. The toilet seat was up, a small but strange detail, considering Sasha lived alone. Fingerprints were found on the underside of the seat, and DNA was collected from her body during the autopsy. The medical examiner reported severe trauma to her neck, unlike anything he had seen before. Sasha had graduated from Seminole High School in Sanford, and the community was devastated. Police turned to the public for help, asking anyone who had seen anything in the early hours of that Saturday to come forward. Security footage from the apartment complex showed Sasha returning home just before 2 a.m. Cameras captured her in the hallway, but her entrance into the building was not straightforward. According to the on-site security guard, Stephen Duxbury, Sasha didn't have her key fob and entered when another resident opened the door. Duxbury admitted that he later found Sasha struggling to enter her apartment. She told him she might have left her keys in her car and asked him to walk with her. But moments after stepping outside, she turned back, claiming she suddenly remembered the door code. According to Duxbury, she rushed back inside alone. She never made it out again. Duxbury would later change his story. He now said he had seen Sasha again, this time with an unfamiliar man. That detail shifted everything. Police needed to identify this unknown individual, and quickly. Retracing Sasha's steps from the attic nightclub to her apartment, detectives mapped out the 30-minute walk and reviewed hours of surveillance footage from that busy Friday night. In several clips, Sasha stood out in white jeans and a purple top. At one point, a street camera captured her with two other people. Hoping for answers, police issued a press release asking those individuals to come forward. It worked. The two women identified themselves and explained that they had found Sasha wandering alone and clearly intoxicated. She had no phone, no ID, and they were concerned. They decided to share an Uber with her to ensure she got home safely. But before they could reach her destination, Sasha abruptly exited the car at a red light, recognizing Uptown Place and rushing toward the entrance. The women followed to make sure she got inside safely. When Sasha couldn't access the building without her fob, they encountered the security guard, Stephen Duxbury, who refused to let her in without identification. As they spoke, another resident opened the door, allowing Sasha to slip inside. The women waited with Duxbury briefly, then left once Sasha had gone in. So far, all accounts aligned, but investigators still had more to uncover. Inside Sasha's apartment, police had found her iPad, which was synced to her iPhone. This allowed them to retrieve messages from the night of her death. One text sent at 5:12 a.m. simply read, "Ben." It was the last known activity from her devices. Ben had been someone Sasha was seeing casually. He told police they had made tentative plans to meet that weekend and admitted they had been texting that night. Ben willingly provided a DNA sample and was quickly ruled out. His alibi was airtight. Another man named Taylor, a former boyfriend who remained close with Sasha, was also interviewed. He had been working a bar shift the night she was killed, which was confirmed by multiple witnesses. Like Ben, his DNA did not match any of the samples collected. Just days after Sasha was found, her family held a private funeral. It was a heartfelt ceremony that honored her diverse background, blending Hindu, Islamic, and Christian traditions. One coworker said it wasn't until the funeral that he realized how many lives Sasha had touched. Meanwhile, police finally gained access to Uptown Place's off-site CCTV footage and began reviewing it frame by frame. At 1:46 a.m., Sasha was seen entering the building. A man followed closely behind her and briefly asked if she was okay before disappearing from view. Moments later, Sasha climbed the stairs toward her apartment. She wasn't seen again. At 2:06 a.m., Sasha reappeared, this time running up another set of stairs. Security guard Duxbury was behind her, just as he had described to police. According to him, he had walked with Sasha to the parking garage to see if her keys were in her car, but when she claimed to remember her door code, they went back inside. Still, something felt off. Detectives kept reviewing the footage, looking for anything unusual in the hours that followed. Then at 6:36 a.m., they spotted something significant. Stephen Duxbury was captured on camera exiting the second floor, carrying two large trash bags. He walked to the parking garage where his car was located, then returned to the building just 2 minutes later. Though he claimed his shift had ended at 6 a.m., he didn't actually leave the premises until 6:39. At first, investigators wondered if taking out trash was part of his responsibilities, but building management confirmed that it was not. Even more disturbing, the trash bags Duxbury carried matched those found in Sasha's apartment. With this revelation, police obtained a search warrant for Duxbury's home. They also called him in to take a polygraph test. The man who had once been just a helpful witness was now the center of a murder investigation. As suspicion closed in on Stephen Duxbury, the night security guard at Uptown Place, investigators moved swiftly. He had been cooperative, at least on the surface, but during a polygraph test, his story began to unravel. When asked if he had ever entered Sasha's apartment, he denied it, but the polygraph indicated otherwise. His physiological responses spiked again when questioned about Sasha's cause of death. The tester asked whether she had been poisoned, stabbed, or strangled. Duxbury denied them all, but the moment strangulation was mentioned, his heart rate surged. Police knew this was critical. At that point, Sasha's cause of death had not been made public. There was no way Duxbury could have known she had been strangled, unless he had been there. While polygraphs are inadmissible in court, the inconsistencies fueled further investigation. At Duxbury's home, detectives found a pair of shoes that matched a footprint left in Sasha's bedroom. Just days later, forensic analysis confirmed that the fingerprint lifted from beneath Sasha's toilet seat belonged to Duxbury. DNA found on her body, including her chest, was also a match. It got worse. His phone history revealed a disturbing internet search made at approximately 5 a.m. on the morning Sasha was killed. He had looked up how to override a quick-set keypad lock, the very type used on Sasha's apartment door. The timing of the search was chilling. Just minutes before Sasha had sent her final message, a single-word text to her ex, Ben. Duxbury bore signs of a struggle, visible scratches, and a bite mark on his arm. For detectives, the picture was becoming tragically clear. The man who was supposed to protect the residents had instead become the threat. On October 21, 2015, just days after Sasha's murder, Orlando police made it official. Stephen Duxbury was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, sexual battery, and burglary. He had used his position as a security guard to prey on someone vulnerable and defenseless. Investigators believed he took advantage of Sasha's impaired state, followed her into her apartment, then overpowered and attacked her. After sexually assaulting and strangling her, he attempted to clean the scene with her own household products and removed items from the apartment to dispose of them elsewhere, including in the trash bags caught on surveillance footage. 2 years later, in November 2017, Duxbury's trial began. His defense tried to suppress evidence, claiming his statements during the polygraph were made under the belief that he was obligated to cooperate or risk losing his license. They also filed to exclude key items like his shoes and interview recordings. But the judge wasn't swayed. She ruled that the evidence, including the shoes and polygraph statements, would be admitted. Legal experts noted the significance of this decision. In a circumstantial case, every detail matters. Each piece is a part of the larger puzzle, and for the prosecution, the pieces were falling into place. Duxbury's claim that he had never been inside Sasha's apartment stood in stark contrast to the forensic evidence. Blood, fingerprints, DNA, matching footwear, digital history, none of it supported his version of events. As the trial moved forward, the defense raised objections and hinted at more motions to exclude evidence, but the timeline was closing. Jury selection was imminent. Once it began, there would be no turning back. The man who was entrusted with the safety of Uptown Place residents now faced the consequences of his betrayal. And for Sasha's family and friends, it was the beginning of a long path toward justice. As the trial of Stephen Duxbury unfolded, his legal team pushed hard to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. Defense attorney Aaron Delgado claimed there were still unanswered questions, such as why Duxbury's clothing hadn't been tested for DNA, and why the shoe prints inside Sasha's apartment matched a size 9 when Duxbury wore a 10.5. They emphasized that no security footage showed Duxbury actually entering Sasha's apartment. But the prosecution argued that the strength of the evidence didn't lie in surveillance. It lay in the science. DNA from Duxbury placed him in Sasha's bedroom. His internet searches, his altered timeline, and the surveillance footage showing him carrying trash bags taken from her unit told a chilling story, one that didn't require video proof to be convincing. When asked about the injuries Sasha suffered, the medical examiner said the abrasions on her lower body could have been caused by a utility or security belt during intercourse. Duxbury's defense even floated the idea that the two had consensual sex, and that someone else could have entered afterward and committed the murder. But the prosecutor made the state's position clear. Her body doesn't lie. The crime scene doesn't lie. The trial lasted 7 days. After just 4 hours of jury deliberation, Stephen Duxbury was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Sasha Sampsidian. He also received an additional 15 years for attempted sexual battery with force and burglary with assault. The judge ordered the sentences to run consecutively. Duxbury remained silent when given the opportunity to speak after his sentencing. In a moment of quiet strength, Sasha's parents acknowledged the pain felt by Duxbury's family, particularly his mother, who sat quietly in the courtroom. But their grief was still raw. Sasha's mother voiced the heartbreak of all they had lost. No future birthdays, no wedding day to prepare for. Every time I attend a wedding, she said, I remember that we'll never have that for our daughter. The family's fight didn't end with the conviction. The Sampsidians filed a civil lawsuit against the Uptown Place apartment complex, its security company, Vital Security, and the manufacturer of the lock on Sasha's door, Spectra and Brands. The 102-page complaint alleged that a lot of complaints about Duxbury's behavior had been ignored, and that the keypad lock system he exploited was known to be flawed. Their attorney argued that the lock could have been easily compromised with something as basic as a screwdriver, citing articles detailing how the same model had failed in other instances. But the defense pushed back, claiming there was no way to prove a defect because the lock was never collected as evidence. It had been discarded by the unit owner after a new tenant moved in. In February 2019, Duxbury filed an appeal, challenging the court's denial of his motion to suppress statements he made and seeking to overturn his conviction for attempted sexual battery. His appeal was denied. Even with justice served, the Sampsidian family's grief remained ever present, but Ken and Tara turned that pain into purpose. In the years that followed, they worked closely with the Orange County Sheriff's Office, helping other families navigate the devastation of violent loss. Tara, once a trauma nurse, stepped away from her role after Sasha's death. Instead, she devoted herself to supporting victims and survivors, sharing stories, and listening to others through initiatives like the annual Victims' Rights Breakfast. Sasha Sampsidian was more than a victim. She was a bright, passionate young woman whose life touched everyone around her. She was a beautiful soul, one of her coworkers recalled. She cared deeply, laughed easily, and made an impact wherever she went. Her family and friends continue to honor her memory, keeping her warmth and spirit alive through action, advocacy, and love. Case 5. The story began in 2003 when Gabe Watson and his newlywed wife, Tina, decided to enjoy their honeymoon with a diving trip at the SS Yongala shipwreck area, off the coast of Australia. But the dream trip quickly turned into a tragedy. When diving to a depth of over 9 meters, Tina suddenly experienced a problem with her equipment. Panicked, she struggled in the water. Seeing this, Gabe swam over to try to pull his wife up, but the current was too strong, making it difficult for him. During the struggle, Tina accidentally knocked off Gabe's mask and air regulator, causing him to take a moment to regain his vision. When Gabe opened his eyes, he found that Tina had sunk too quickly. Knowing he couldn't save his wife, he tried to surface to get help. A professional diver immediately dove down to search for Tina, but it was too late. When they found her, Tina was lying at the bottom of the ocean lifeless. That heartbreaking moment was captured in this photo. If you look at the bottom right corner of the image, you'll see someone lying motionless at the ocean floor. That's Tina. But what made this case suspicious was Gabe's conflicting statements. Although he claimed to be a professional rescue diver with over 55 dives, he still couldn't save his newlywed wife. Even more suspiciously, just a few days before the fateful trip, Gabe had asked Tina to change her life insurance policy, making him the sole beneficiary. However, following her father's advice, Tina didn't make the change, though she told her husband she had. When questioned by the police, Gabe provided up to 16 different versions of the incident, each time with conflicting details. This raised suspicions about whether it was an accident or a meticulously planned scheme. Prosecutors presented 2 theories. Either Gabe was an arrogant, incompetent man who exaggerated his abilities and failed to save his wife. Or worse, he was a cold-blooded murderer who deliberately cut off Tina's air supply, causing her to pass out and slowly drown. Nevertheless, somehow, Gabe was only convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. What outraged Tina's family the most was that his sentence was reduced to just 18 months, and Gabe was quickly released. The second photo is just as chilling, capturing a murderer and his victim. In the photo, a man in a yellow sweater is holding a newborn baby while posing for a family photo. This moment seems perfectly normal, resembling any family album picture. But the truth is a heartbreaking story. In 1985, a serial killer claimed the lives of at least 10 women across 2 states. Among them, the body of Lisa Stasi, a 19-year-old mother, was never found. Investigators also had no idea what had happened to Lisa's 4-month-old daughter Tiffany. 15 years later, in 2000, police arrested a man named John Edward Robinson for theft and assaulting a woman. When they searched his residence in Kansas, police discovered the remains of 2 missing women in a large barrel on his farm. After his arrest, John confessed that he was the serial killer responsible for a string of murders starting in 1984. The most shocking detail was that John was the man in the yellow sweater in the family photo, and the newborn baby he was holding was 4-month-old Tiffany. After murdering Tiffany's mother, John brought the baby home and gave her to his brother and sister-in-law to raise, knowing they desperately wanted a child. At that time, Tiffany's name had been changed to Heather Robinson. Shockingly, the Robinson family, including John's brother and sister-in-law, had no idea about the baby's true identity. They also didn't know that John was the notorious serial killer the police had been hunting. It wasn't until 2019, when Heather was 34 years old, that she agreed to an interview with a television station to talk about her life. Heather admitted that in 2000, when she was 15 years old, she learned the horrifying truth about her identity. For 15 years, she had known John as just an ordinary uncle, until the shocking revelation that he had murdered her mother. On the day the truth was revealed, she recalled her adoptive mother running up and down the stairs in panic, while her adoptive father broke down in tears. Later, John was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole and is currently serving his sentence in Kansas. On April 1, 2014, Chris Kremers and Liz Fruin went for a walk in the dense forest near the Baru volcano in Boquete, Panama. Accompanying them was a small dog. Little did they know this would be their final journey. Chris and Liz were two girls from Amersfoort, the Netherlands. They had spent 6 months traveling and studying in Panama. Besides exploring nature, they planned to participate in volunteer activities, teaching local children to draw, do crafts, and learn Spanish. Before starting their fateful hike that day, the two girls posted on Facebook detailing their plans. They planned to visit local villages and have lunch with two fellow Dutchmen. By the evening of April 1st, only the dog returned, while Chris and Liz vanished without a trace. Their host noticed the unusual situation and immediately organized a search, but there was no sign of them. By the morning of April 2nd, the girls still hadn't shown up as scheduled. It was known that on April 2nd Chris and Liz had an appointment with a local guide for a hike in Boquete, but neither of them appeared. The incident quickly gained the attention of locals, authorities, and the families of the two girls from the Netherlands. Search efforts began, involving civilians, police, helicopters, and search dogs. But day after day, week after week, and then 2.5 months passed, and they remained mysteriously missing. When search efforts seemed to be hitting a dead end, a glimmer of hope emerged on June 14, 2014. A local woman discovered a blue backpack washed up on the riverbank, about an 8-hour walk from where the girls had disappeared. Inside were personal items such as glasses, Lizanne's passport, $83 in cash, a water bottle, and 2 bras. However, the most significant discovery was the girls' phones and a camera. When police examined the devices, a chilling truth was revealed. The girls had attempted to make 77 emergency calls to both the Dutch and Panamanian emergency number 112 over the first 4 days of their disappearance. Sadly, due to the deep forest location and poor signal, only one call lasting 2 seconds connected, but no one answered. Even more suspiciously, on April 6th, someone tried to unlock Chris's phone, but the password didn't match. This led police to suspect that someone else may have been using her phone. Eventually, on April 11th, both phones died due to battery depletion. But what was found on Lizanne's camera was what truly horrified everyone. The first few photos, taken on a trail near the Continental Divide. This is a remote and very dangerous area with few passers-by. However, the photos taken on the night of April 8th, between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., were entirely different. They showed the girls' belongings scattered on rocks and mysterious flashes of light in the dark forest. The most terrifying discovery was a photo showing blood seeping from the back of Chris's head. After investigating the area where the backpack was found, police discovered Chris's clothes neatly folded by the riverbank. A few weeks later, they found the pelvic bone and a foot inside a boot belonging to one of the girls. Not long after, the remains of both girls were found, but they bore extremely puzzling signs. Lizanne's bones appeared to have decayed naturally, while Chris's bones were stark white, resembling those that had been bleached. This led police to question whether the girls had suffered an accident, or if someone had interfered with the case. Despite years of investigation, no statements came from locals, guides, or hikers. No one knows what really happened to Chris and Liz, and to this day, their disappearance and deaths remain one of the most horrifying mysteries in history. If the two Dutch girls mysteriously vanished, leaving behind haunting final photos, the following story is even more chilling, as the victims' final moments were captured by the murderer. This is the photo capturing the final moments before the murder of model Judy Dull, the first victim of the twisted serial killer. The incident began late on the night of October 27, 1958, when a woman pointed a gun at a man with large ears, demanding that he stay put on the highway, attracting the attention of passers-by. When the police arrived, a horrifying story unfolded. The man with large ears claimed to be a photographer, but was, in fact, a serial killer obsessed with beautiful women. The model pointing the gun at him was his fourth victim, but had managed to escape thanks to her high alertness. At the scene of the attack, police found ropes, a gun, and a camera inside the man's car. Shortly afterward, witnesses identified this man as the one who had been seen with several missing models over the past few months. His name was Harvey Glattman, a perverted man obsessed with beautiful women. Under intense police interrogation, Harvey eventually shouted that he had murdered 3 female models and claimed they would not find the bodies unless they looked for his toolbox. Immediately, the police searched Harvey's home and found a toolbox, but what they discovered inside were chilling death photos capturing the victim's final moments. Among those, the haunting series of photos of Judy and Dull left investigators most disturbed. Judy was a promising 19-year-old model known for her stunning beauty. In the toolbox, there were heartbreaking images of Judy tied with ropes, her mouth gagged, and her eyes pleading for help, a sight that deeply saddened the police. Even more shocking, some photos showed Judy nude, tied to a wooden post, horrifying many people. The final pictures of Judy were taken in a desert, the same place where Harvey murdered her and abandoned her body for wild animals to scavenge. August 1st, 1957, was Judy's fateful day when she accepted Harvey's offer to model for a photo shoot. When she arrived at what was supposed to be a studio, in reality, Harvey's apartment, he tied her up and gagged her. After releasing her temporarily, Harvey threatened her with a gun, forcing her to remove her clothes and pose for a series of disturbing photos, promising to let her go afterward. However, once the shoot was over, Harvey drove her to the Mojave Desert and strangled her with a rope. While Judy struggled in her final moments, Harvey grabbed his camera and took additional photos, capturing her final breaths. Satisfied with his trophies, Harvey returned home, leaving the victim's body behind in the desert. Judy's disappearance triggered a police investigation, but no clues were found, allowing the serial killer to continue his spree with 2 more models. It wasn't until his 4th intended victim escaped that Harvey's horrific crimes came to light. The police then took him to the desert where he had abandoned the victims. Most of the skeletal remains had been ravaged by animals, leaving only a few bone fragments. However, this was enough for forensic experts to confirm the remains belonged to Judy, Shirley and Bridgeford, and Ruth Mercado. Harvey Glattman admitted that his murderous obsession with young, beautiful women stemmed from a fixation on women in ropes. The media dubbed him the Glamour Girl Slayer, shocking the entire United States. Upon investigating Harvey's past, police were stunned to learn that he had previously been arrested and jailed twice for harassing women. However, those few years in prison failed to change him, and instead, he sank deeper into his violent fantasies. After his arrest, Harvey confessed to his crimes and repeatedly demanded to receive the death penalty. Eventually, the court handed down the maximum sentence to him. He was executed on September 18, 1959, putting an end to his horrifying trail of crimes. This is the last photo of Abigail Williams taken at the Monon High Bridge Trail in Carroll County, Indiana. Just minutes later, she and her friend, Liberty German, who had taken the photo, disappeared without a trace. On February 13, 2007, Abigail invited her close friend Liberty to go for a walk along a trail in Delphi. The 2 girls had arranged to meet Liberty's father at a designated spot, but he waited endlessly without seeing his daughter or her friend. The father reported the situation to the police, and a search began immediately, but nothing was found. On February 14th, the bodies of the 2 unfortunate girls were discovered. Upon examining Liberty German's phone, the police found a suspicious video. It showed a man in jeans, a dark blue jacket, and a hat appearing in the Delphi Trail area. At the time, the 2 girls were there. However, due to the poor image quality, the police couldn't identify the suspect. It wasn't until 2022 that the police identified the suspect as Richard Matthew Allen, but he wasn't sentenced to a total of 130 years in prison until November 2024. This photo was taken in 1943 in a small town called Kapusjord, Hungary. The owner of the photo said the photographer was her father, and the person in the picture was her mother. At first glance, the photo seemed very ordinary, but upon closer inspection, people noticed something unsettling. Behind the woman in the photo appeared a little girl in a dress, but what's more eerie is that the girl had no hands and no face. Many believed it to be the ghost of a little girl or some other eerie entity. Even more chilling is that the photo had not been edited. It was the original print, still kept as is by its owner. No one could explain the strange presence of the little girl in the photo. This picture was taken using regular film, with no Photoshop effects involved. The husband of the woman in the photo took a picture of his wife and child on a sunny afternoon, celebrating their first day at their new apartment in Chicago, Illinois. However, when they developed the photo, they were shocked to see the face of an elderly woman with her hair tied up, sitting next to a bulldog in the left window. The couple insisted that no one else was in their home at the time the photo was taken. This is a photo of the Cooper family from the 1950s. In the picture, two smiling women are seen happily with two young boys. However, what grabs attention is a man's body seemingly falling from the ceiling. To this day, no one has been able to explain it. Mary Elizabeth from Australia visited the cemetery in 1945 to visit the grave of her 17-year-old daughter, Joyce Elizabeth Andrews. After cleaning the grave, she took a commemorative photo, but when she developed it, Mary was horrified to see something strange. In the picture, a baby was sitting next to her daughter's grave, staring directly into the camera lens. Mary didn't recognize the baby, and there was no child present at the cemetery when she took the photo. This is a photo Mabel Chinnery took of her husband in their car. The photo was taken in 1959, when Mabel's husband was on his way to visit a relative's grave. Upon reviewing the photo, Mabel noticed a figure inside the car with glowing eyes, sitting in the back seat. Peter Berthelot took a photo of his wife Diane while she was praying in a church in Worsted, Norfolk. The couple believed they were alone in the quiet church, but when they developed the photo, Peter discovered something unusual behind his wife. The couple showed the photo to their parish priest, who claimed it was the spirit of a holy figure known for healing the common people. Jim Templeton and his wife took their daughter on vacation to Berg Marsh and captured many photos. When they returned home and reviewed the pictures, they discovered something very frightening in one of the photos of their daughter. It seemed that in the background behind the little girl, there was the ghostly figure of a man. The couple claimed that when they took the photo, there was no one else around. This photo was taken with a Nokia 7250 in Eastwood, Manila. In the picture, two girls are posing on the street at night, but a mysterious ghostly figure appears to be grabbing one of the women's arms. A woman named Jackie Rem, from Florian, Alabama, captured this moment during a visit to Six Flags Great America Amusement Park. At the time the photo was taken, it was drizzling with foggy conditions, yet the C-126 camera still clearly captured the image of a boy wearing a red sweater and a white collared shirt. The owner of the photo insisted that this was a ghost, as there was no boy present when she took the picture. Case 6. It was meant to be a normal night. Tracy Ocasio went out to watch a basketball game at her favorite bar in Oakey, Florida. She was 27, full of dreams, and had every intention of going home after the game. But something changed that night. She met a man she didn't know well. She gave him a ride, and after that, she disappeared. The next day, her phone was off. Her car was found, left behind on a quiet, dark street. But Tracy was nowhere to be found. What really happened that night? And who was the last person to see her? Tracy Ocasio came into the world in 1982, born to Elizabeth, affectionately known as Liz, and Joseph Ocasio in the quiet town of Ocoee, Florida. From the very start, Tracy had a special connection with her father and was proudly known as a daddy's girl. Her heart was full of ambition and curiosity. She dreamed of pursuing a career in radiology and had an undeniable love for animals. Her pets ranged from scorpions and lizards to a fluffy cat named Cookie. Tracy also had a creative side. She loved crafting handmade jewelry during her downtime and often immersed herself in books, especially stories rooted in history and ancient civilizations like World War II and Rome. The Ocasio household was tightly knit. Tracy, even when out for the day, never failed to call her mom, keeping her updated on the little details of her life. After finishing high school, she picked up work as a waitress at a nearby restaurant while also enrolling in online college classes to chase her academic goals. At one point, Tracy left home to start a new chapter with her fiancé. But the engagement didn't last, and she eventually moved back in with her parents, a change they welcomed with open arms. Despite the setback, life at home was good, and she leaned on the comfort of family. Sports, particularly basketball, were something she and her dad deeply bonded over. The Orlando Magic was their team, and watching games together became a cherished ritual that Tracy never skipped. By age 27, Tracy was living a full and hopeful life. She had goals, strong family ties, and a clear sense of direction. But then came the day that changed everything. On May 26, 2009, Tracy was excited for the Orlando Magic playoff game against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Originally, she had planned to watch it with her dad, but he had to run an unexpected work errand. So, Tracy decided to head to the Florida Tap Room on Raleigh Street by herself, a bar she frequented and where she knew many of the regulars. Packed with fellow basketball fans, it was a familiar and safe space for her. That night, she watched the game surrounded by cheers and energy. But after the final buzzer, something went wrong. Tracy never came home. Liz grew anxious when she didn't hear from her daughter after the game, especially since Tracy was always in touch. Even more concerning was the fact that Tracy had told her she planned to return home immediately after the game. Hours passed, calls went unanswered, and just like that, Tracy had vanished. The next day, her family filed a missing person report, and the search began. Investigators turned to the last place she was seen, the Florida Tap Room. Surveillance footage from the bar provided a crucial clue. Tracy had been captured on camera, leaving around 1 to 1:30 a.m. She wasn't alone. A bald man, roughly her age, was seen with her. They appeared to be enjoying themselves, chatting comfortably before walking out together. Neither Liz nor Joseph recognized the man. Tracy was wearing black jeans, a tank top, a hooded jacket, and a green and white hat that night. There was no sign of distress in the footage. She appeared alert and left willingly. Still, the identity of the man became the top lead for investigators. While they searched for him, a new development emerged. On the evening of May 27th, Tracy's yellow 2002 two-door Chevrolet Cobalt was discovered parked on Franklin Street in Oakley. It was the same car she had driven to the bar the night before. The vehicle was left unlocked in a dark, isolated area. No streetlights, no traffic, no sign of life. It looked clearly abandoned. Inside, there were no personal belongings, no bag, no phone, nothing. The only detail that caught investigators' attention was that both front seats were reclined forward, as if someone had recently accessed the back seat or tried to help someone get in or out. That behavior didn't align with Tracy's habits. First off, she rarely used the back seat of her two-door car. It was cramped and not ideal for an adult. If she had anything with her, it likely would have been stored in the trunk. Adding to the concern, her father, Joseph, made it clear. Tracy hated dark areas and would have never willingly parked in such a spot unless she had no choice. So the question loomed. Why was her car left there? The answer came swiftly. The man seen with Tracy on the night of May 26th was finally identified. His name was James Hadaway. Detectives reached out to him, and surprisingly, he was open to talking. James explained that he met Tracy at the Florida Tap Room. They chatted during the game, and afterward, he asked her for a ride since he didn't have a car. According to him, Tracy dropped him off and drove away. But here's where things got strange. Tracy's car had been found just a few yards from James' home, where he lived with his father. Now, not only was James the last person to see Tracy, but her abandoned car was basically on his doorstep. Suspicion grew fast. Investigators dug into Tracy's phone data. Her phone had shut off around 8:30 a.m. on May 27th, the morning after the game. And the last pinged location? Right where her car had been found. That gave police just enough cause to get a search warrant for James' house. Inside, there was no sign of Tracy, no clues, no items of hers, but there was a large amount of drugs. As it turned out, James had been using drugs while out on bond, which led to his arrest. And that's when more disturbing information came to light. James had a long criminal history, including charges related to juvenile kidnapping. Not long after his arrest, two witnesses stepped forward, friends of James, who said they'd seen him leave the bar that night with a woman matching Tracy's description. One even claimed Tracy went into James' home and hung out there briefly. James had allegedly encouraged her to try drugs, but she refused. After that, she reportedly left. That directly contradicted James' earlier claim that she had only dropped him off. His story was unraveling. Though he wasn't charged in connection with Tracy's disappearance, James was now in custody and unable to flee. Meanwhile, detectives poured all available resources into finding Tracy. They brought in bloodhounds and cadaver dogs, but oddly, the dogs couldn't even detect her scent in her own car. As police continued their investigation, Tracy's father took matters into his own hands. Joseph plastered flyers across Ocoee, searching parks, streets, and abandoned lots, anywhere his daughter might have ended up. With no progress, the family reached out to Tim Miller, the founder of Texas EquiSearch, for help. Volunteers combed over 2,500 acres of land, but there was still no sign of Tracy. All the while, detectives kept questioning James. Though he remained tight-lipped about Tracy, they had growing suspicions. At this point, nearly a month had passed since her disappearance. Digging further into James Hadaway's background revealed a deeply troubling history. He had been in and out of trouble from a young age. Drug abuse, random jobs, shady activities like helping his father dredge ponds, and illegally dumped debris. He was already facing charges, but as he stood trial, new layers of his past emerged. People who knew James came forward with disturbing stories. One common thread was his sudden mood shifts. He could flip from friendly to violent without warning. Several women shared experiences of feeling unsafe around him. Then came the most chilling account, one that mirrored Tracy's case almost exactly. Nearly a year before Tracy vanished, another woman named Rachel Clark had agreed to give James a ride home. As they said goodbye, James embraced her, then snapped. He violently attacked Rachel, tackling her to the ground and whispering, "Don't make me kill you." She fought back, screaming, until a stranger passing by intervened and scared James off. Rachel survived, but she was left with severe bruising, scratches, and trauma. Her account was a haunting echo of Tracy's last known moments with James. Though no charges were filed against James in Tracy's case at the time, he had become the prime suspect. His lies, criminal history, proximity to Tracy's abandoned car, and violent past made him the center of the investigation. What made things even more maddening was the fact that James Hathaway was never charged for his brutal attack on Rachel Clark. She had filed a police report, but by the time detectives tried to locate him, he had seemingly vanished until nearly a year later when he resurfaced as the main suspect in Tracy's disappearance. Once James was back on the radar, investigators reopened Rachel's case. They were determined to keep him behind bars, especially now that they strongly suspected he was involved in Tracy's vanishing. Meanwhile, the search for Tracy continued. Then something unexpected happened, something just as disturbing as her disappearance. On February 22, 2011, almost 2 years after Tracy went missing, detectives were searching Lake Carter, which had mostly dried up. During the search, they discovered what appeared to be human remains. First, they found part of a spine and a skull. As the lake continued to drain, more bones emerged. 2 days later, on February 24th, authorities also recovered a wallet, an ID card, and a cell phone nearby. The name on the ID, Christopher George. This wasn't the breakthrough detectives expected. They were hoping to find answers about Tracy, and instead, they stumbled upon a completely different individual. But who was Chris George? As it turned out, Chris and Tracy didn't know each other, but there was someone who did have a connection to both. James Hadaway. DNA confirmed the remains belonged to Chris. That added a new layer to the case, and police began looking into the possible link between him and James. Around that time, multiple tips were pouring in. One particularly chilling call was made anonymously to Tracy's father. The caller claimed to know a woman who had acted as an accomplice to James, and according to her, James had been involved in 3 separate homicides in the Orlando area. The tipster also said that the bodies, along with the murder weapons, were dumped in local lakes. That claim was the driving force behind the lake searches. While the tip could have been bogus, detectives couldn't afford to ignore it, especially with James's violent history. Eventually, they discovered that Chris had last been seen with James and another individual in early February 2009, which was shortly after James assaulted Rachel, but before Tracy vanished. Chris, who lived in Apopka, had been reported missing on February 11, 2009. Witnesses told police they had seen James and another man walking out of a wooded area, acting strangely. A patrol officer had even stopped them that night. When questioned, James told the officer that his friend, Chris, was high and needed help. The officer let them go without further investigation. Not long after, Chris's vehicle was found abandoned at Lake Carter, the same place where his remains and belongings were later recovered. When authorities confirmed Chris's identity, they contacted his family. The Georges and the Ocasios, though complete strangers, found an unfortunate connection through tragedy. Both families were devastated and united by their shared grief, desperate to see justice done. Unfortunately, Chris's autopsy results were inconclusive due to advanced decomposition. No official cause of death could be determined. While James's presence at the scene raised serious concerns, there wasn't enough physical evidence to charge him in connection with Chris's death. But detectives weren't giving up. They knew they had a strong case in Rachel's assault, and that's where they decided to begin. At the time, James was sitting in Seminole County Jail on unrelated charges. But now, with Rachel's testimony and physical evidence, they were ready to take him to court. In May 2011, the trial for the attempted murder of Rachel Clark began. The centerpiece of the prosecution was Rachel herself. With remarkable strength, she took the stand and recounted in vivid detail how James had turned on her the night she gave him a ride. Her description of the attack was chilling. How he suddenly snapped, tackled her to the ground, and began violently assaulting her while whispering threats. James sat in court with a blank expression, listening as his actions were laid bare. His defense team argued that he had been drunk and incoherent, with no recollection of what happened that night. They tried to shift focus, suggesting the incident had been a misunderstanding caused by substance abuse. But then the jury was shown photos of Rachel's injuries, her bruised neck, scratched arms, and battered face. The impact was immediate and undeniable. The courtroom fell silent. The horror of her ordeal left a lasting impression on everyone present. And with that, the case against James Hathaway took a darker and more damning turn. It was clear to everyone in the courtroom this wasn't the result of drunken confusion or a heat-of-the-moment mistake. The attack on Rachel Clark had been deliberate, violent, and terrifying. After a tense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. James Hathaway was found guilty of attempted murder, along with burglary, robbery, and false imprisonment. The sentence was life in prison. As the judge read the decision, the courtroom seemed to collectively exhale. After the sentencing, James stood and addressed the court, offering an apology to Rachel. "Her injuries were my fault, and I do apologize for what happened," he said. "I know I didn't try to kill her, but I'm sorry for what did occur." But for many in that room, his words rang hollow. To think that he could inflict so much trauma, and then simply say sorry, as if that might somehow erase it all, it was infuriating. Rachel had fought for her life. She had carried the physical and emotional scars of that night, and no apology could undo that. As for Tracy's case, investigators were forced to admit the painful truth. They likely weren't going to get justice for her. Everyone involved had a strong suspicion about who was responsible, but there simply wasn't enough evidence to bring formal charges. James remained the prime suspect, but suspicion alone isn't enough for a conviction. After the trial, Tracy's father, Joseph, spoke publicly. "If there's any comfort," he said, "it's that he's behind bars and won't destroy another family like he destroyed ours." Then, in a twist that stunned everyone, James appealed his conviction in 2015. He claimed that his attorneys had pressured him into waiving his right to a speedy trial. His appeal was granted, and a new hearing was held, but the result didn't change. James Hathaway remained sentenced to life in prison. 15 years have passed since Tracy was last seen leaving the Florida tap room, a place she knew and loved. No calls, no texts, no sightings, nothing. Her disappearance has left a gaping hole in the lives of her parents, Joseph and Liz, who continue to fight for answers. They've lived with heartbreak, fear, and hope, often all at once. Joseph still struggles with guilt. He often thinks back to the night Tracy went out alone. In his heart, he believes that if he had been with her, things might have turned out differently. But this wasn't his fault. No one could have predicted what was going to happen. If blame belongs anywhere, it's with James. But without solid evidence, justice remains out of reach. Despite everything, Case 7. It was just after 4 in the morning when a loud noise broke the silence in a quiet neighborhood in Melbourne. A mother woke up, startled by the sound of glass shattering. Something didn't feel right. She quickly got out of bed and rushed down the hall to her daughter's room. What she found on the other side of that door would change her life forever. Just hours earlier, everything seemed fine. Her daughter was happy, making plans for her birthday, and they had their usual bedtime talk. But that peaceful night turned into something no one could have imagined. There was broken glass, blood, and the person responsible had already disappeared. This is the heartbreaking story of Celeste Mano, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, and how the warning signs were there all along, but no one listened. Celeste Mano was born on November 22, 1996, in Italy. She grew up with 2 brothers, Jaden, her older half-brother, and Alessandro, her younger sibling. When she was still a child, her family relocated to Melbourne, Australia, where she eventually completed high school and enrolled at university in 2015 to pursue studies in criminology and psychology. Celeste was passionate about understanding the human mind. She dreamed of becoming a psychologist so she could help others navigate their struggles by delving into the intricacies of thought and behavior. After graduating, She began working at a call center located in Mill Park, a suburb of Melbourne. Her natural ability to connect with people made her stand out at work, and she quickly climbed the ranks to become a team leader. It was there that Celeste met Chris Ridsdale. The two hit it off and started dating. Chris was smitten. He often said Celeste was one of a kind, describing her as a true gem. She had a magnetic personality, and her warmth left a mark on everyone who knew her. Celeste was the kind of person who made life feel brighter. She had been a cheerleader during her school years, and her love for dancing never faded. But beyond her joyful nature, it was her kindness that truly defined her. Her family meant the world to her. Celeste shared a close bond with her brothers, and her relationship with her mother, Aggie, was especially strong. After finishing college, Celeste moved back in with her mother in the Melbourne suburb of Mernda. The two shared a nightly tradition. Before bed, Aggie would always tuck Celeste in, and they'd talk about their day. No matter how old Celeste got, she always turned to her mother for support, guidance, and love. Life seemed full of promise. Celeste was making future plans, exploring adulthood, and looking forward to celebrating her upcoming 24th birthday. But just days before that celebration, everything changed. On November 14, 2020, she and Chris went out for brunch at a rooftop bar. It was one of their first outings in a while, now that COVID-19 restrictions were easing. They snapped cheerful photos together, and Celeste even made their relationship public on social media with a sweet post. Things between them were getting serious, and they were happy to let the world know. The next day, Sunday, November 15th, Celeste posted that picture on Instagram, and then spent the rest of her day watching a movie and making birthday plans with her mom. That evening, she and Aggie shared their usual bedtime ritual. As always, Aggie told Celeste she loved her. Celeste replied, "I love you more, good night." That would be the last time Aggie ever heard her daughter's voice. At around 4:10 a.m. on November 16, 2020, the sound of shattering glass jolted Aggie awake. Alarmed, she rushed to Celeste's room, only steps away, and was met with a nightmare. Celeste lay motionless on her bed, soaked in blood. Her bedroom window had been smashed, and shards of glass were scattered across the floor. Aggie cradled her daughter, desperately pleading for her to wake up. Hours earlier, they had been talking and laughing. Now, Celeste's lifeless body was in her arms. It was a sight no parent should ever witness. Emergency responders were called immediately, and upon arriving, they were horrified by the brutality of the scene. Despite Aggie's pleas, it was too late. Celeste had died. Overwhelmed by grief and rage, Aggie uttered a chilling accusation. He killed her. Investigators took her words seriously and began piecing together what had happened. The autopsy would later reveal that Celeste had been stabbed 23 times, primarily in the chest, stomach, and arms. Her arms showed clear signs of struggle. She had tried to fight back. Police estimated that the entire attack lasted about 2 minutes, but Aggie had reacted almost instantly to the sound of the window breaking, and the house wasn't large. As police continued their investigation, they questioned Aggie about her haunting accusation. Her answer would lead them down a shocking path, because it wasn't the first time Celeste and Aggie had spoken out about this man. They had gone to the authorities before. They had tried to raise the alarm, but no one really helped. And now it was too late. As investigators dug deeper into Celeste's life, they uncovered the presence of someone whose unhealthy obsession had been quietly growing in the background, an obsession that would ultimately lead to her death. That man was Louis Sacco, a 35-year-old who once worked alongside Celeste at the call center. At first glance, he was just another colleague, but beneath the surface, something darker was brewing. Louis Sacco was born in Iraq in 1984 to Christian parents. He was the eldest of 5 siblings. In 1992, the Sacco family was granted a humanitarian visa and moved to Australia, hoping for a better life. As a child, Louis was described as gentle and soft-spoken, though somewhat isolated. He preferred staying in his room over socializing, and that introversion only intensified as he got older. College marked a shift in Louis's personality. He grew increasingly distant from others, and was known to keep to himself. He had never been in a romantic relationship, and most of his time was spent alone. For several years after graduation, Louis struggled with unemployment. That changed in April 2018, when he landed a job at the same workplace, where Celeste had already made a name for herself as a team leader. Initially, Louis didn't have any particular connection with Celeste. They were simply part of the same team. But everything changed in June 2019. Due to poor performance, Louis was let go from his position. On his last day at the call center, the person assigned to escort him out of the building was Celeste. She kept it professional, wished him well, and extended a polite handshake. But then, something unexpected happened. As she held out her hand, Louis pulled her in and kissed her cheek before walking away. The moment left Celeste unsettled. When she got home, she told her mother, Aggie, about the uncomfortable encounter. Aggie tried to reassure her, brushing it off as a harmless gesture, maybe the result of a little crush. But looking back, it was clear that this wasn't innocent at all. It was the beginning of something much more dangerous. Soon after, Louis began sending Celeste private messages through Instagram. The tone started off as admiring, with Louis professing his love for her and saying he couldn't function without thinking about her. He confessed that he couldn't sleep or eat and asked whether Celeste felt the same way. Trying to be respectful, Celeste replied politely, letting him down gently. She thanked him for the kind words, but made it clear that she saw him only as a coworker and had no romantic interest in him. She wished him the best and then blocked his account. But Louis wasn't ready to accept her boundaries. After being blocked, he began creating fake Instagram accounts to continue contacting her. Over time, his messages grew stranger and more disturbing. What started as romantic infatuation quickly turned into relentless harassment. Some of the messages became explicitly sexual. One particularly chilling message read, "Celeste, if you had my body for a day, what would you do to me?" Horrified, Celeste finally responded more firmly, "Stop contacting me. This is making me very uncomfortable. Please respect my wishes and stop," she wrote. But Louis didn't listen. He continued to reach out, relentlessly creating new accounts. His fixation was escalating, and it was affecting Celeste's emotional well-being. She was losing sleep, becoming anxious, and those closest to her, like her boyfriend Chris and her mother Aggie, could see how deeply it was impacting her. What made things worse was that Louis's messages started to take a more aggressive tone. In one final message, sent through yet another fake profile, he wrote, "My impression of you has changed. You're just like the rest. I'll dedicate every ounce of my energy to proving my worth to the world. That's my promise to you. This is my last message." It wasn't just troubling, it was threatening. After 6 long months of enduring this disturbing behavior, Aggie finally convinced Celeste to report Louis to the authorities. Together, they went to the police station and explained the ongoing harassment. But instead of receiving protection, Celeste was told that Louis hadn't broken any laws. According to the officers, since he hadn't made any direct threats or committed a physical crime, there was little they could do. Their advice? Ignore it. Rather than offering help or protection, the officer suggested that if she didn't want attention from strangers online, she should consider leaving social media altogether. Despite laws technically existing to address these behaviors, many are vague, outdated, or poorly enforced. More often than not, authorities won't step in until something violent or criminal actually happens, but by then, the damage has usually already been done. Celeste and Aggie left the station that day without even a formal report filed. The officer didn't write down Louis Sacco's name. There was no follow-up, no warning issued, just a quiet suggestion to disappear from the internet. So Celeste was left to handle it all on her own. Over the next 6 months, things spiraled even further out of control. Louis's behavior turned from creepy to terrifying. He began parking outside Celeste's workplace, tracking her movements. He messaged her over 140 times from different fake accounts. And in a deeply unsettling move, he even figured out where she lived by following her home from work. Celeste was living every stalking victim's worst nightmare. Her fear was constant, and it started affecting her daily life. She even confided in a coworker, admitting she no longer felt safe, and that she truly believed Louis might one day take her life. She wasn't just anxious, she was convinced her time was running out. It became clear that more needed to be done. So once again, Celeste and Aggie returned to the police station, this time hoping for a better outcome. Thankfully, they met with an officer who took them seriously. He encouraged them to apply for a personal safety intervention order against Louis, and they did exactly that. Surprisingly, Louis tried to fight the order in court, but his attempts were denied. For a little while, things felt calm again. Celeste began to breathe a little easier, but the peace wouldn't last. Just 3 months before the tragedy, on August 15, 2020, Louis sent Celeste a 3-page handwritten letter. In it, he begged her to withdraw the intervention order, promising that if she did, he would leave her alone. He even ended the letter with a smiley face, a detail that made the entire message feel all the more chilling. What Lewis didn't seem to understand or didn't care about was that sending that letter was a direct violation of the court order. This time, Celeste had legal ground to stand on. She immediately contacted the police and reported the breach. Finally, something happened. At the end of August 2020, Lewis was arrested for violating the protective order. For the first time in over a year, it seemed like the system was working. But then, in a twist that left everyone stunned, Lewis was released the very next day. Only now, he wasn't just obsessed, he was furious. He couldn't understand how Celeste could have him arrested, and in his twisted mind, he still believed she owed him something, that he was entitled to her. After his release, the harassment resumed with new intensity. He sent one final, unhinged message to Celeste that read, "I know you rejected me, I get it. I'm like dirt to you, I get it. I know you hate me, I get it." Around that time, Lewis went to a local store and purchased a hammer and a knife. And then silence. For nearly 3 months, Celeste heard nothing from him. No messages, no sightings, no signs. It almost felt like he had disappeared. But the truth was far more sinister. Lewis hadn't given up. He was waiting, watching, planning. Then, on November 14th, 2020, Celeste shared a photo on Instagram. A happy moment from a brunch date with her boyfriend, Chris. It was a joyful, public declaration of their relationship. A normal gesture for anyone, but a trigger for someone like Lewis, who had never stopped obsessing over her. That one photo shattered the illusion of peace. Unbeknownst to Celeste, Lewis had still been monitoring her online presence. He saw the post, and that's when he made his move. He had already figured out which home was hers, likely from watching her car in the driveway. Somehow, he had even managed to learn the layout of the house, possibly by piecing together visual clues from her social media posts. He knew exactly which window belonged to her room. On November 16th, 2020, just after 4 a.m., Lewis climbed the fence of the Mano family home. Armed with the hammer he had purchased months earlier, he smashed Celeste's bedroom window. The sound of breaking glass woke Aggie immediately. By the time she reached her daughter's door, it was too late. Lewis had already climbed through the window and brutally attacked Celeste with a knife, stabbing her at least 23 times in under 2 minutes, according to investigators. The speed and violence of the attack were horrifying. Relentless, fueled by rage and delusion. Celeste never stood a chance. After the brutal attack, Lewis fled the Mano residence the same way he came in, through the shattered window and over the backyard fence. Blood was later found on both. Meanwhile, Aggie was left to discover the unthinkable. Her daughter's lifeless body, just moments after hearing her voice the night before. Around the same time paramedics arrived, a neighbor's CCTV camera captured a car speeding away from the area. That vehicle was later confirmed to be Lewis's. Once the police spoke with Aggie and learned about the year-long harassment Celeste had endured, they knew they had to act. But it turned out they didn't have to go looking for Lewis. He came to them. Shortly after the attack, Lewis walked into a local police station with an injured hand and turned himself in. Handing over Celeste's address, he told the officer, "She's dead. She's dead. Go have a look. You know what happened. It's your fault." And in many ways, those words held truth. He then tried to provoke the officer into shooting him, as if hoping to end his life alongside Celeste's. But police restrained him and took him into custody. Once arrested, Lewis was formally charged. Police searched his phone and found a disturbing collection of evidence. Hundreds of screenshots of Celeste and her boyfriend Chris, images from her Instagram, and even Google searches related to Chris, the bar where their last date took place, and shockingly, the floor plan of Celeste's home. To this day, it's unclear how he obtained that. The legal process was long. Between COVID-19 delays and Lewis's own manipulation of the system, nearly 3 years passed before the trial reached its conclusion. Lewis tried every tactic in the book, claiming mental illness, firing his attorneys just before court dates, and even attempting to represent himself. Though he eventually pled guilty, he insisted he had only stabbed Celeste twice, not 23 times as stated in the coroner's report. He leaned heavily into a defense based on mental instability, and numerous psychiatric evaluations were ordered. One psychiatrist testified that Lewis experienced hallucinations and claimed an imaginary figure named Isha compelled him to act violently. But even the psychiatrist warned the court Lewis was dangerous and likely to reoffend. If given the chance to manipulate others, especially women behind bars, it could be catastrophic. In the end, it became clear that Lewis's attempts to appear mentally unwell were calculated. He wasn't driven by delusions. He was fueled by rejection, entitlement, and ego. He couldn't accept that Celeste didn't want him, and in his mind, that alone justified everything. On February 29, 2024, Louis Sacco, then 39 years old, was sentenced to 36 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 30. The judge acknowledged the impact of Louis's rare personality disorder. It was this disorder, the judge said, that prevented him from issuing a life sentence. The ruling stunned Celeste's family. Aggie, devastated, expressed that the system had shown Louis mercy, something it never showed her daughter when she begged for help. Celeste's funeral had drawn over 100 people who came to say goodbye to a woman whose light had been extinguished far too soon. Aggie mourned the future she'd never get to witness, Celeste walking down the aisle, becoming a mother, or simply growing older. Her brothers, Jaden and Alessandro, were equally heartbroken. The image of Celeste's smile was etched into their memories, a reminder of the kind, joyful sister they'd lost. Following the sentencing, Aggie began fighting for change. She launched a campaign to strengthen stalking laws and called for mandatory electronic monitoring of individuals under safety intervention orders. She firmly believed that if Louis had been monitored, Celeste might still be alive. Aggie had made a promise to her daughter to seek justice, to make sure no one else would be failed the way she was. Celeste's story is a tragic reminder of just how dangerous stalking can become. Many victims never report it, assuming nothing will be done. And too often they're right. Without decisive legal action or consistent enforcement, cases like Celeste continue to happen. Even now, stalking remains a crime that's not taken seriously enough until it's too late. Celeste did everything right. She blocked her stalker. She filed reports. She asked for help. Twice. And still, she was left vulnerable to a man who believed he was owed her affection. Now, her family lives with the pain of her absence every day. They continue to advocate for stronger protections, but no law can bring Celeste back. The home she once filled with laughter now echoes with grief. Her dreams were cut short by someone who refused to accept no. We can only hope that Celeste's story sparks real change, that one day, victims of stalking will be heard, believed, and protected before tragedy strikes. But until then, we are left asking the same question Aggie and her sons ask every day. Case 8. In early June 2014, some highway workers were out cutting grass in Geneva, Wisconsin. It was just a normal day, until they spotted something strange lying near the edge of the road. 2 suitcases, one purple, one black. At first, they thought maybe someone had just dumped them. But as they got closer, they noticed a terrible smell and flies swarming all around. When the police showed up and opened those suitcases, what they found inside was horrifying. It would kick off a major investigation that stretched across states and uncover the dark past of a man no one ever suspected. But at that point, no one knew just how twisted the story would get. In early June 2014, road maintenance crews were trimming grass along a Walworth County highway. It was routine work, until one of the workers noticed something disturbing by the roadside. 2 suitcases, one purple, the other black, had been abandoned in the brush. Their presence alone raised suspicions, but the strong odor and swarm of flies surrounding them made it clear something was terribly wrong. A police officer was dispatched to the scene. Upon arriving, he unzipped the purple suitcase and was met with a horrifying discovery: a woman's body inside a black trash bag. The black suitcase held a second woman's body. One of them was in an advanced state of decomposition with her hands bound behind her back by rope. The other woman was found naked, wearing a collar with a rope around her neck. Both had clearly been deceased for some time. The area was immediately cordoned off and a full-scale investigation was launched. A bulletin was issued across the Midwest. 2 unidentified female victims had been found. The call for help prompted a flood of missing persons reports from departments across the region. Authorities now had to comb through countless names and details, hoping to match them to the victims. Investigators began analyzing the ropes used to bind the women, looking for clues, any trace evidence or DNA that might lead to the killer. Within just a day, they were able to identify one of the victims, thanks to her distinctive tattoos. She was Laura Simonson, a 37-year-old mother of 7 from Farmington, Minnesota. Her family had reported her missing on November 22, 2013. The police had traced her last known movements to the Microtel Inn and Suites in Rochester, Minnesota. Hotel staff confirmed that she had stayed there on November 2nd and 3rd, and security footage revealed she wasn't alone. A man had checked in with her, paid in cash, and refused to register under his own name. The next day, he was seen leaving alone, pushing a trolley loaded with bags. Laura was never seen again. By mid-January, a tip came in naming a man, Stephen Zellick, as someone Laura might have been with. The detective in charge of the case contacted the West Allis police to check on Zellick's residence, but no trace of Laura was found. Weeks later, after Zellick failed to respond to a letter, the FBI and Wisconsin Division of Criminal Investigation visited his home. Zellick admitted to being at the Rochester motel with Laura, but claimed they parted ways afterward. He denied any romantic involvement and insisted he hadn't seen her since. Then, in April 2014, just weeks before Laura's body was discovered, a disturbing post appeared on a classified ad website. It accused Stephen Zellick of being a sadist who had enslaved a woman named Laura Simonson. The post claimed she was being held naked, shackled, and abused, and it called for people to harass Zellick to pressure him into releasing her. It included his phone number, email, and linked him to a BDSM website where he allegedly used the username Mr. Handcuffs. At the time, no one knew who authored the post, but it became chillingly relevant once Laura's remains were found. But the horror didn't end there. Investigators still had to identify the second victim, known only as Jane Doe. She was estimated to be between 15 and 35 years old, weighing around 120 to 140 pounds. She had an overbite, 2 piercings in each ear, and a small heart tattoo on her lower left pelvis. A forensic sketch was released in hopes of identifying her. Eventually, the sketch reached friends and family of Jenny Games in Oregon, who believed it was her. Dental records from a foster parent confirmed her identity. Jenny was 19, a student from Cottage Grove, Oregon. Her friends described her as cheerful and full of life. Jenny had a young son, but had lost custody. She also had a tough upbringing, spending time in multiple foster homes. Though Jenny had stayed in touch sporadically, her loved ones hadn't reported her missing, believing she had simply moved on. She graduated from an alternative high school with honors and earned a college scholarship. Those who knew her remembered her as resilient and optimistic. Now, detectives had to figure out how Jenny had ended up dead and who was responsible. They uncovered that both Laura and Jenny had been active on the same BDSM website and had interacted with the same man, Stephen Zellick. In one message to him, Laura had written that if he ever killed her, no one would ever find her. The man's email was traced to a West Allis apartment. Authorities placed him under surveillance and tracked his vehicle. When he returned home from work, police were waiting. He denied ever meeting Laura in person, but agreed to submit a DNA sample. He admitted to having an interest in BDSM since he was 19, and said it had been part of his life ever since. But investigators knew better: his online alias, his connection to both women, and now the physical evidence were painting a much darker picture. On an obscure corner of the internet, Stephen Zellick maintained a disturbing profile. His online presence left no ambiguity. He was searching for a permanent 24/7 slave, someone willing to surrender their autonomy completely. His words painted a dark picture. I seek a no-limits, irreversible form of slavery, captivity, dehumanization. That's what I'm after. He described the ideal state of a submissive, restrained with ropes, hooded, caged, or paraded by a collar and leash, bound in wrist and ankle restraints. According to him, this wasn't just a preference, it was a lifestyle, and one he was determined to find someone to share. What Zellick didn't realize was that, despite all his precautions, the digital trail he tried so desperately to erase still lingered. His computer had been equipped with software that constantly wiped data. Tens of thousands of deletions were logged, but the authorities had access to Laura Simonson's laptop, which had retained copies of their online conversations. Even worse for him, investigators had already collected footage from the hotel surveillance cameras. He was seen checking in with Laura, hard proof they'd been together, but circumstantial evidence wasn't enough to secure a conviction. Detectives needed something indisputable to tie him to the 2 dead women. That's when forensic analysis of the rope used to bind Jenny Games revealed a crucial breakthrough. DNA found on the cord matched that of Stephen Zellick. With this confirmation, police obtained a warrant to search his West Allis apartment. What they found was unsettling. The unit itself was grimy, but tucked away were cleaning agents, bleach, and other tools typically used to scrub away evidence. Investigators also found one of the very suitcases used to transport the bodies. Inside it, sex toys, bondage devices, and a legitimate police badge. The man at the center of this investigation wasn't just a fantasist hiding behind a screen. He had once been a police officer. Zielik had served with the West Allis Police Department from 1989 until he resigned in 2001. But his record was far from clean. Internal affairs documents painted a troubling picture. He had misused his authority, stalked women while on duty, and accessed confidential records to find their personal details. Altogether, 10 disciplinary actions had been documented during his time in uniform. Allegations ranged from intimidation to abuse of sensitive police databases for personal use. A recorded conversation between Zielik and his police chief captures a tense exchange. The chief questioned the appropriateness of repeatedly approaching women while on duty. Zielik claimed his behavior was never improper. Very casual, he said, but the complaints from local businesses and individuals painted a much different picture. In May 2001, one dancer accused him of offering $300 for a private show. She agreed to visit his home. Once there, she claimed to hear the sound of handcuffs being readied. Fearing what was about to happen, she tried to flee, only for Zielik to allegedly throw her to the ground and choke her. She managed to escape and pounded on a neighbor's door, shouting that he was going to kill her. Zielik insisted she was trying to rob him. In the end, no charges were filed against him, but she was arrested on an unrelated prostitution warrant. Just a few months later, he quietly resigned from the police force. That resignation allowed him to sidestep disciplinary action and maintain a clean enough record to later secure a private security license. A former roommate, Jamie, who had once dated him before they decided to remain friends, later revealed chilling details. She had found a large wire cage in his basement, along with various BDM gear. According to Jamie, Zielik had confided that for 7 years, he kept a woman imprisoned in that cage while still serving as a police officer. Fearing for her own safety and that of her children, Jamie waited until he left for work, then packed up her things, loaded a U-Haul, and left without looking back. In January, the same time he was being questioned about Laura Simonson, Zielik posted on another forum, this time claiming he was in search of an owner himself. He wrote that he was looking to be enslaved, caged, and reduced to an animalistic state. He described an ideal life of captivity on a farm or in a cell. Despite the eerie nature of his online activity, few could have predicted what would happen next. On June 25th, just after 8 a.m., authorities from Walworth County arrived at his apartment complex in West Allis. Armed officers with shields and a battering ram stormed the unit. Witnesses watched in shock as officers poured in, later exiting with evidence bags and Zielik's refrigerator. Stephen Zielik, now 52, was arrested on 2 counts of concealing a corpse. His quiet life as a security guard had been a mask. Though he had worked at a security company since 2007, his co-workers described him as peculiar. Even on the very day he discarded the bodies, Zielik had been chatting online. The district attorney later revealed he had messaged a woman named Petra that same day. In the conversation, he expressed a desire to keep her in absolute captivity, saying he was ready to start planning her dehumanization. The picture of Stephen Zielik became clearer with every new piece of evidence. Files documenting his history spanned hundreds of pages, from his initial application to the police department in 1989 to his resignation letter in 2001. In the earlier years of his police career, Stephen had been described in annual evaluations as professional, respectful, and dependable. But as the late 1990s rolled into the early 2000s, a darker side of his behavior began to emerge. Complaints started to surface. Multiple women came forward, reporting that Zielik had followed and harassed them while he was on duty. According to prosecutors, his story with Jenny Games when she was just 16 and still in the foster care system. She and Zielik first connected through a bondage-themed website. Their communication paused and then resumed when she turned 18. He convinced her to come live with him in Wisconsin, encouraging her to delete her social media and disconnect from people she knew. In August 2012, Jenny boarded a one-way flight to Milwaukee, telling her family she was enrolling in welding school. Zielik picked her up at the airport, and they checked into a hotel in Kenosha. Later, he would tell police that they had engaged in breath play, a risky practice involving restricted breathing. He claimed that during a session, he lost control while she was tied up and blindfolded, unintentionally strangling her. His attorney argued that what followed was panic. He placed her body in a suitcase and brought it back to his apartment, storing it in his refrigerator. Jenny's remains stayed there for over a year. As the body began to decompose, the fridge could no longer stay shut, so he taped it closed. After his arrest, Zielik confessed to his involvement in Jenny's death, but the police emphasized that they still needed to determine whether it met the legal definition of homicide. Jenny, originally from Cottage Grove, Oregon, had told family in late 2012 that she was relocating, her way of protecting them, but also the reason they never filed a missing persons report. Friends remembered her as big-hearted and full of good intentions, but when authorities questioned Zielik, he couldn't even recall her name. Jenny's body remained in the refrigerator until Laura Simonson entered the picture. Like Jenny, Laura had met Zielik online. The two arranged to meet at the Microtel Inn and Suites in Rochester, Minnesota. Zielik once again encouraged her to delete her social media, sell her car, and cut all ties. According to his account, Laura also died during a breath control session. Another accident, he claimed. Laura was discovered naked, with a gag in her mouth attached to a collar. Jenny's body was wrapped in plastic, her hands bound behind her. After Laura died, Zielik packed both women into suitcases, placed them in his trunk, and drove them to a remote stretch of Como Road in Geneva, Wisconsin. That's where he left them, in plain view near a ditch. Zielik later admitted he simply decided one day that it was time to get rid of the bodies. Oddly, the area where he dumped the suitcases was only a short distance from the local police station. Prosecutors said this was no coincidence. They argued he chose that spot in a moment of carelessness, or perhaps arrogance. Despite the gruesome details, Zielik's defense team painted a different picture. They claimed the deaths were accidents, not crimes, and that by leaving the suitcases in the open, he hadn't tried to hide anything. They argued he wasn't trying to conceal the bodies, just to be rid of them. Zielik was formally charged with 2 counts of hiding a corpse. His defense attorney requested a $50,000 bond, citing his college education and community ties. But the judge wasn't convinced. Bail was set at $1 million. The judge said the high bail was necessary, both to ensure public safety and prevent Zielik from fleeing the jurisdiction. At that point, the only charges filed were related to concealment of the bodies. But given the evidence piling up, particularly the similarities in how both women died, that would soon change. On Tuesday, August 5th, Stephen Zielik was formally charged with first-degree intentional homicide and hiding a corpse in connection with the death of Jenny Gaines. The charges marked a turning point in a case already steeped in horror. Because Laura Simonson had died in Minnesota, legal proceedings for her case were being handled there and were paused until the Wisconsin trial concluded. Kenosha County District Attorney emphasized that Laura's death had been critical in unraveling the truth behind both killings. Zielik had quickly become a suspect in her disappearance, especially after security footage showed the two checking into a hotel together. These deaths were accidents or the result of misjudged games. Laura's family described her as a fragile individual, someone who had struggled with mental illness. Her father revealed that she had been posting escort ads on Craigslist, and in 2010, her children were placed in his custody. The family had already endured a heartbreaking loss when Laura's 13-year-old daughter, Alyssa, who had disabilities, passed away in June 2013. In the months that followed, Laura's other daughter, Kaylee, launched an online fundraiser seeking help for her grieving mother. "She's homeless, her car is falling apart, and it's the only shelter she has," Kaylee wrote. The campaign never raised funds, but by fall, Laura was living with her own mother, Mary, in Farmington. On November 2nd, she left to meet someone she had only known online, Stephen Zielik. 20 days later, her disappearance was officially reported. Prosecutors were preparing to argue that the killings were calculated. Zielik, they said, intentionally targeted women who were isolated or vulnerable, encouraged them to sever their digital and personal connections, and ultimately used methods of killing that left minimal forensic evidence. Zielik's background in law enforcement may have helped him both commit the crimes and manipulate the investigation. Then came an unexpected twist. On the very day jury selection was set to begin, Zielik reached a plea agreement. In a move that stunned even his own legal team, the former West Allis police officer pled guilty to killing 19-year-old Jenny Gaines. Her remains had been discovered in a suitcase off a Wisconsin highway in Walworth County in 2014. The plea meant that Zielik, then 54 years old, was facing a potential 75-year prison sentence. The state planned to seek the full term, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. The original charge of first-degree intentional homicide was reduced as part of the plea deal. Zielik admitted guilt to first-degree reckless homicide with the use of a dangerous weapon, the rope used in Jenny's death, and to hiding her body. In total, he received 35 years in prison, with 10 additional years of supervised release. An extra 5 years were added concurrently for the charge of concealing a corpse. During sentencing, Zielik showed little emotion. He did offer a brief apology, describing Jenny as a good person. But the prosecution portrayed him as a predator, someone who had deliberately sought out women on the margins of society, then used their trust to destroy them. "I would undo it if I could," Zielik said, insisting her death had not been intentional. The district attorney later said he was satisfied with the sentence, believing it would ensure public safety. Zielik's defense lawyer, Jonathan Smith, urged the judge to consider that Laura's death happened later and should not weigh into Jenny's case. But the judge disagreed. Then it was time for the trial for Laura Simonson's murder. Now 55, Zielik pled guilty to second-degree murder with intent in her death. For that, he received a 25-year prison sentence. Although the judge acknowledged that Zielik had cooperated with the court, she determined that the maximum penalty was appropriate. The judge described Laura Simonson as a mother, daughter, sister, and friend. She said, "You will stay in prison long enough to ensure no one else suffers at your hands." Some members of Laura's family had hoped for a harsher punishment. Her daughter called him a monster and said, "Maybe while he rots in a cell, he'll understand the pain he caused." Because the two sentences are to be served consecutively, one after the other, Stephen Zielik will remain in prison for the rest of his life. There's no easy way to close a story like this. What happened to Laura and Jenny is heartbreaking beyond words. Both were mothers. Both had been through unimaginable struggles, and both fell prey to a man who saw their vulnerability as opportunity. Let us know what you think about this case in the comments below.